Listen to the wind. It whispers across the deep, dark waters of a northern fjord, carrying the scent of pine needles, wood smoke, and the sharp, clean brine of the sea. The mist is thick tonight, rolling in soft, heavy banks that glow with a silvery luminescence under the pale light of a moon hanging low in the sky. Gentle ripples lap against the curved wooden planks of a resting ship, a rhythmic, endless lullaby woven into the very fabric of the night. You're standing on the edge of an ancient world, a world where the earth breathes, the stones hold memories, and the stars tell ancient stories. The air here is crisp and pure, filling your lungs with a profound stillness. This is a time long before the noise of the modern age, a time when life moved to the slow, deliberate rhythm of the changing seasons, the rising sun, and the turning tide. As we wander through the gentle shadows of this distant past, I want you to know that you are completely safe. There is absolutely nothing you need to hold on to. You do not need to try to actively remember the details, the names, or the places we visit. Just let your mind soften. Let the ideas drift through your awareness like the silver mist rolling off the dark water. If a thought or an image catches your imagination, let it linger for a warm moment and then softly let it go. What stays, stays. What fades simply makes room for peace. You're merely a passenger on this journey, warm and secure, observing the quiet, hidden moments of a world that is often misunderstood. Let the tension in your shoulders melt away. Unclench your jaw. Breathe in the cool, ancient air and let it out slowly, releasing the weight of the day behind you. We are walking toward the soft, inviting glow of a hearth fire, stepping gently into the quiet hum of a life lived intimately close to the earth. Ahead, the silhouette of a grand timber longhouse emerges from the fog, its sweeping roof covered in a thick blanket of green turf. The golden light of a fire spills out onto the snow. Here, the stories of the north begin to quietly unfold. Imagine the morning after a storm, standing on the deck of a broad oak ship surrounded by an endless rolling expanse of grey ocean. The sky above is entirely obscured by a thick, seamless canopy of white clouds. There is no bright sun to guide the way, no familiar constellations to read. Yet, the navigator stands calmly at the bow, unbothered. He holds a small, precisely cut, translucent crystal up to the overcast sky. This is the sunstone, a piece of naturally occurring Icelandic spar. As he slowly turns the cool, smooth stone, a hidden magic awakens. It catches the invisible, scattered light of the hidden sun, splitting the light into a double refraction. A subtle, glowing point appears within the geometry of the stone, revealing the exact position of the sun behind the heavy clouds. Through this pale, unassuming stone, they found their way across featureless waters. It is a quiet reminder that even on the most clouded days, the light is still there, patiently waiting to guide you home. The journey across the calm waters brings us to a quiet shore, where a magnificent wooden vessel rests, not as a tool of travel, but as a breathtaking masterpiece of devotion. Run your hands, in your mind's eye, over the smooth, dark oak of the sweeping prow. It is vibrantly alive with intricate, flowing carvings that dance across the surface. Deeply incised lines loop and spiral into elaborate, endlessly interlocking patterns of vines and gentle beasts. This is a silent testament to countless hours of patient labour, performed by the flickering light of a winter fire. They were unparalleled woodworkers who looked at the dense forest as an infinite canvas for their imagination. During the long, snowbound winters, they remained indoors, rhythmically whittling and shaping the wood, transforming the simplest objects into tactile tapestries. It speaks to a profound human need to make the everyday world beautiful. Tracing these endless, looping wooden lines in your imagination, let your thoughts wander along their unbroken paths, finding peace in their continuous rhythm. Stepping away from the intricately carved ships toward the warmth of the village, A soft, familiar sound catches your ear. It is a deep, rhythmic purring. Resting comfortably on a bundle of woven wool near a doorway is a large, majestic cat. This is the forest cat of the north, wrapped in a thick, insulating double coat of fur with tufted ears twitching gently in the breeze. These magnificent creatures were a cherished part of northern life. They were welcome on the great voyaging ships, keeping stores of grain safe during long journeys. But their presence was also deeply spiritual. In their rich mythology, the goddess Freya travelled across the sky in a chariot drawn by two large, magnificent blue cats. To have a cat in the home was to have a living connection to the divine, a blessing of the goddess herself. Listen to that gentle, rhythmic sound in your mind, feeling the soothing vibrations settle into your chest, a warm heartbeat shared across 1,000 years. Following the sound of a bubbling stream, we discover another peaceful rhythm of their daily lives. The image of the north is frequently painted with untamed strokes, yet they deeply valued cleanliness and the quiet rituals of self-care. Beside their carefully forged tools, you would find beautifully crafted grooming implements. Imagine a comb meticulously shaped from the fallen antler of a red deer. The bone is polished to a gleaming smoothness, its fine teeth perfectly spaced to glide through long, thick hair. They held a sacred observance at the end of every week known as Laugardagur, translating to washing day or pool day. They gathered at natural hot springs, letting the steaming, mineral-rich waters soothe tired muscles, using softly scented soaps made from animal fats and alkaline ashes. Picture the warm, enveloping steam rising into the crisp air, the sensation of hot water washing away the burdens of the week. It is a restorative practice, a reminder of the quiet dignity in caring for oneself. As the steam from the hot springs dissipates, it reveals a scene of breathtaking vibrancy. We often imagine the distant past in muted shades of grey, but a northern settlement was a brilliant splash of colour against the snowy landscape. The garments hung to dry near the longhouse, are woven from soft wool and dyed in deeply saturated hues. The transformation of raw, pale wool into these striking colours was a slow alchemy of nature. They gathered humble plants from the meadows, extracting vibrant secrets. The crushed roots of the madder plant yielded a deep, warm red mirroring a dying fire. The fermented leaves of the woad plant produced a brilliant blue rivaling the deepest twilight sky. The tall stalks of the weld plant were boiled to draw out a bright, cheerful yellow. The process required patience and time, gently coaxing colour from the earth. Let your mind drift through these vivid pools of colour, feeling the warmth each hue brings to the quiet, snowy canvas of the world. We step back inside the grand timber hall, where the air is thick with the scent of pine. Near the central hearth, two figures sit in relaxed concentration, shadows dancing gently across their faces. Between them lies a wooden board, etched with a grid of intersecting lines. This is Nefertafel, the king's table, a game of strategy and silent contemplation. Listen to the deeply satisfying, dull click of the playing pieces carefully moved across the wood. These thoughtful creations are carved from pale bone, smooth glass, or warm, glowing amber collected from distant shores. The game requires no hurried words, only the slow, methodical turning of the mind. In the long stretch of the northern winter, when the world outside was locked in ice, these games were a sanctuary of order. The rhythmic clinking of glass on wood provided a peaceful anchor in the night. Let the deliberate pacing of the game settle your thoughts, a reminder of the quiet satisfaction in moving slowly with intention. As the game draws to a gentle close, a hushed silence falls over the hall. From the shadows, the skald steps closer to the warm light of the fire. In a world before vast libraries, the mind itself was the ultimate sanctuary for stories. The poet begins to speak, their voice falling into a soothing rhythmic cadence that washes over the listeners like a steady tide. They weave complex tapestries of words, holding entire histories within the quiet spaces of their memory. To make the poetry beautiful, they use intricate metaphors. The sea becomes the whale road. The wind is the wolf of the branches. As you listen to the hypnotic rhythm of the skull's voice, you don't need to understand the ancient language to feel its power. The steady rise and fall of breath and the deep resonance in the chest create a deeply relaxing atmosphere. It is the original lullaby, the comforting sound of a voice keeping shadows at bay with the light of a well-told story. The skull's voice fades into a pleasant echo, and our journey takes us back out into the crisp air of a winter morning. The fjord is now a vast, smooth mirror of solid ice, stretching toward the horizon under a pale, frosty sky. Here, a solitary figure moves effortlessly across the frozen expanse. Bound to the soles of their heavy leather shoes are skates made of carefully polished animal bones. Coated lightly with fat to repel water, these bone skates do not cut into the ice like metal blades. They slide silently over the frosted surface. The skater uses a long wooden pole to gently push forward, their bodies swaying in a slow, pendulum-like motion. The only sound is the quiet, satisfying brush of the smooth bones sweeping across the ice. They found a way to turn the harshest, frozen elements of their world into a pathway for effortless travel. Imagine gliding over that endless white mirror, experiencing the weightless sensation of moving freely across the sleeping world. Leaving the frozen fjord behind, we return to the heart of the settlement, drawn by an aroma that reaches deep into the most ancient, comforting parts of the brain. It is the smell of roasting grain, warm honey, and wood smoke. In the centre of the longhouse burns the long central hearth, the radiant heart of the home. Here, the daily rhythm of baking takes place. Soft, round discs of dough, mixed from hardy barley and oats, are laid directly onto flat, searing hot stones placed near the glowing embers. Watch as the edges begin to crisp, small bubbles forming on the surface. The baker turns the flatbread with a wooden paddle, a slow, repetitive motion born of generations of practice. The act of baking on an open fire is a primal comfort. The radiant heat of the stones, the golden glow of the coals, and the earthy scent of the baking bread create an atmosphere of profound security. Let the warm scent wrap around you like a heavy blanket, deeply nourishing and perfectly safe. As the fire burns down to soft embers, the day surrenders to the enveloping velvet of the northern night. Stepping outside one last time, you look up. Far away from any artificial light, the sky is an infinite canvas of diamonds scattered across the blackness. For the people of the north, this night sky was not an empty void. It was the canopy of something beautifully ordered. They believed in the great world tree, an ash tree so colossal that its branches stretched across the universe, holding all realms of existence within its sheltering embrace. The stars were imagined as dewdrops resting delicately on its infinite invisible leaves. When the wind blew through the pines, it was an echo of the breeze rustling through cosmic branches above. To look up was to feel securely held within the structure of a living universe. As you lie beneath this starry canopy in your mind, let the immense scale of the world tree bring you comfort, its sweeping branches cradling the night sky, watching over you as you peacefully drift into sleep. As that vast cosmic canopy of the world tree slowly dissolves into the quiet physical reality of the night, the profound, biting chill of the northern winter remains just outside the thick timbered walls. Yet, within the deepest, most protected shadows of the sleeping quarters, there exists a weightless, enveloping warmth. This incredible comfort was a direct gift from the wild, born of a beautiful, silent agreement between humanity and nature. Along the rugged, windswept coastlines, the people built small, sheltered stone nesting boxes for the wild eider ducks. In return for this vital protection from harsh coastal winds and predators, the ducks would leave behind a portion of their incredibly soft down, the very feathers the mother duck instinctively plucks from her own chest to insulate her nest. This gathered eider down is an absolute marvel of the natural world. It possesses no hard quills whatsoever, only thousands of microscopic, intricately interlocking threads that trap the warm air in a near-weightless floating cloud. To sleep beneath a woolen blanket carefully stuffed with this pale cloud-like down was to feel almost nothing against the skin, experiencing a sensation of floating, yet being entirely and perfectly protected from the freezing air. It is a gentle, lingering reminder of how humans can exist in a delicate, respectful harmony with the wild, finding mutual, peaceful comfort in the coldest and most remote of places. From the absolute insulated softness of the midnight bed, the dawn eventually arrives, announced not by a sudden disruption, but by a quiet, rhythmic, metallic sound moving through the early morning light. As the lady of the estate walks gracefully through the waking, smoke-scented hall, there is a soft, reassuring jingle resting at her waist. Suspended from magnificent, highly polished domed bronze brooches on her heavy woolen dress hangs a beautiful collection of carefully forged wrought iron keys. In this deeply structured society, these keys were far more than simple utilitarian tools for opening wooden chests or heavy storehouse doors. They were the absolute, undeniable symbol of her personal authority, deep trust, and profound social importance. The woman of the house was the undisputed, respected manager of the farm's wealth, the sole keeper of the vital provisions that would ensure the entire family's survival through the long, dark months of winter. The gentle, heavy clinking of her iron keys was the literal sound of order, a steady, percussive heartbeat that promised unyielding security and sustenance. It reveals a world where genuine power was deeply practical, worn openly as a beautifully crafted, audible testament to the absolutely vital role of women in sustaining life on the rugged edge of the known world. That pervasive sense of quiet order and patient creation echoes further into the sunlit, dusty corners of the hall, where a massive, imposing wooden frame leans slightly against the timber wall. This is the warp-weighted loom, an instrument of almost magical slow-motion transformation. It does not look like a modern mechanical machine, but rather a giant standing wooden harp waiting patiently to be played by skilled hands. From the heavy horizontal wooden beam at the very top, hundreds of individual vertically spun woolen threads hang straight down, pulled perfectly and evenly taut by the weight of smooth river stones, or carefully baked rings of clay tied to their lowest ends. As the weaver works, the rhythmic wooden clatter of the shuttle passing back and forth through the strings creates a mesmerizing, hypnotic acoustic landscape. This patient, intensely repetitive motion was entirely responsible for weaving the massive, heavy, wind-catching woolen sails that famously powered the iconic longships across the open, unforgiving ocean. It is a stunning, perspective-widening realization that the sheer amount of time, raw wool, and dedicated human energy required to weave a single, massive square sail far exceeded the time it took to fell the great oak trees and physically build the wooden ship itself. Every single historic voyage across the sea was literally pushed forward by the patient, rhythmic turning of countless hours spent peacefully at the loom. Zooming in from the grand architectural scale of the standing loom, we find another deeply soothing form of creation happening on a much smaller, intensely personal scale. Near the radiating warmth of the central fire, a pair of hands works quietly with a single thick needle carved from the flawlessly polished antler of a wild reindeer. They are not knitting or crocheting, but practicing an ancient, wonderfully intricate technique known as nalbinding. Using short lengths of thick, naturally water-resistant sheep's wool, the single bone needle loops and knots the yarn into a dense, almost impenetrable heavy fabric. Because each individual loop is entirely knotted to the one before it, a garment meticulously made this way will not run or unravel if it is snagged by a branch or torn by the rough wilderness. It is a slow, methodical method designed entirely for endurance, creating thick, windproof mittens and incredibly warm socks that perfectly trap the body's natural heat against the biting external frost. As you imagine the slow, deliberate, endless looping motion of that smooth bone needle pulling the soft wool through the air, notice how your own breath begins to softly mirror that steady, unbroken rhythm. Your body is growing a little heavier now, sinking comfortably and securely into the quiet, protected space you have created for yourself tonight. Nothing needs to be held too tightly. Just allow your thoughts to smoothly follow the gentle, endless looping of the warm wool. The warm, earthy, lanolin-rich scent of the spun wool gently fades from the mind, giving way to a completely different, expansive atmosphere, an echoing memory of the brief, glorious, and vibrant northern summer. Imagine a sudden, breathtaking shift in the landscape, moving far away from the enclosed hearth and out onto the vast open tundra under the endless, surreal, peach-coloured twilight of the midnight sun. The heavy winter snow has entirely melted, revealing a seemingly infinite ocean of low, spongy green moss and delicate, resilient alpine plants. Hidden within this vast, quiet expanse are tiny treasures of absolute shocking brilliance, the cloudberries. Often respectfully called Arctic gold, these small, delicate berries visually resemble raspberries, but possess a stunning translucent amber colour that seems to literally glow from within under the soft horizontal light of the endless summer night. Foraging for these bright berries was a quiet, highly meditative task, requiring profound patience to slowly walk the marshy, forgiving ground. The tart, deeply sweet flavour of the freshly picked cloudberry was a vital, life-saving source of vitamin C, perfectly preserving the bright, concentrated energy of the endless summer sun to physically sustain the people through the absolute sunless darkness of the impending winter. It is a beautiful, calming testament to finding delicate, life-sustaining sweetness in what initially appears to be a harsh, empty, and barren landscape. From the vast, open, sweeping expanse of the sunlit summer tundra, the relaxed mind draws inward once again, entirely captivated by a tiny, glowing, mesmerizing point of intense light. It is the hypnotic, blinding orange glow of molten liquid glass held perfectly and deliberately still in the very center of a specialized, intensely hot, roaring fire. A highly skilled, deeply focused artisan is carefully winding a thin, glowing thread of liquid glass around a long iron mandrel, rotating it with the absolute, practiced precision of a master watchmaker. As the liquid glass is gently pulled from the flame and cools slightly in the air, it hardens into a perfectly round, incredibly vibrant bead. They layered thick, opaque whites, deep, oceanic cobalt blues, and bright, cheerful mustard yellows to create intricate microscopic patterns, perfect little stripes, undulating waves, and flawlessly formed geometric eyes. These tiny, vivid, beautiful spheres were not merely simple ornaments, they were a universally understood global currency of beauty. Glass beads found carefully buried in isolated northern settlements have been chemically traced back to the warm, sandy shores of the Mediterranean and the distant, bustling markets of the Middle East. To hold a string of these bright, heavy beads in the palm of your open hand was to hold a tangible map of the entire known world, a brilliant, shining connection to distant lands and unknown artisans, all brought quietly together in the frozen, sleeping north. That deep, invisible connection to distant others extended far beyond the trade of beautiful objects. It actually formed the very moral, unshakable foundation of their everyday society. In a natural landscape that could be fiercely unforgiving and suddenly dangerous, the wooden threshold of the longhouse was universally considered a profoundly sacred boundary. This was the ancient, unbreakable law of Frith, a deeply ingrained societal concept of peace, guaranteed sanctuary, and inviolable hospitality. When a weary traveller, even a complete stranger, crossed the heavy wooden threshold and entered the warmth of the glowing hall, all hostilities, arguments, and weapons absolutely had to be left out in the cold. To offer a guest a comfortable place by the fire, a warm, nourishing meal, and a safe, protected place to sleep was not merely a polite, optional courtesy. It was a profound, non-negotiable moral duty, a sacred obligation that was believed to be watched over and judged by the gods themselves, The home was the ultimate guaranteed safe harbour from the chaotic, swirling storms of the outside world. Feel the profound, settling, absolute safety of that ancient promise right now in your own space. In this exact moment, you're deeply inside the sanctuary. The heavy doors are firmly closed to the noise, the demands, and the rush of the waking world. Your mind can simply drift in this ambient warmth, completely protected, entirely at ease, knowing there is absolutely nothing you need to defend against tonight. Stepping back out of the peaceful sanctuary to stand on the edge of the rocky shore, you look out at the vast, featureless, intimidating expanse of the open ocean. Without the aid of a magnetic compass or modern instruments, crossing these deep, treacherous waters seems like an impossible, terrifying leap of faith. Yet the master navigators of the North did not see an empty, terrifying void. They saw a highly detailed, living, breathing map. They survived by reading the subtle, moving, deeply poetic language of the earth itself. They knew that the colour of the water subtly, beautifully shifted from the deep, impenetrable, almost black blue of the ocean abyss to a paler, chalky green as it finally approached the hidden, shallow, continental shelves of distant coastlines. They sat in absolute silence and listened for the distinct, rhythmic, echoing breathing of specific massive whale pods that were known to congregate only near certain isolated islands. They watched the purposeful, determined, arrow-like flight paths of the golden plover and the Arctic tern as they migrated towards solid land in the changing seasons. They did not just sail blindly upon the water, fighting the elements. They listened to the world, perfectly attuned to the microscopic, shifting details of the living environment, finding their way home by deeply, quietly understanding the magnificent nature that completely surrounded them. When those long, arduous, salt-stained journeys across the sea finally ended, the sailors looked eagerly to the familiar shores for comforting landmarks. Today, when we walk through those landscapes, we imagine these ancient markers, the great runestones, as solemn, weathered pillars of plain grey rock standing silently in the tall grass. But to the people who originally carved them, they were spectacular bursts of magnificent, highly intentional colour, designed specifically to catch the eye from miles away. The intricate interlacing knotwork serpents and the sharp, angular runic alphabets deeply carved into the hard granite were meticulously filled with vibrant, startling paints. Using crushed natural earth minerals mixed with fat and natural binders, they painted the stones in striking, high-contrast, beautiful palettes. Deep, rich iron ochre reds, stark, matte charcoal blacks, and bright, glowing, chalky whites. Standing in stark contrast against the brilliant, blinding white of the deep winter snow or the lush, dark greens of the spring grass, a freshly painted runestone was a vibrant, living billboard of memory, poetry, and love. Catching the low, golden angle of the early morning sun, the bright colours would seemingly sing across the quiet landscape, a beautiful, colourful, and defiant gesture against the silent fading of time, ensuring that the names and stories of the past remained vibrantly, beautifully alive. The striking painted colours of the standing stone gradually give way in the mind to the soft, heavy, captivating gleam of polished metal. In the quiet, peaceful hours of the late evening, a master silversmith works near the dying ambient light of the forge, expertly creating beautifully heavy, intricately detailed arm rings. Silver was the true, undisputed currency of the North, stored not just in small stamped coins, but in these thick, beautifully twisted, wearable bands of precious metal. This was the foundation of the famous hack silver economy, where small pieces of the ring could literally be chopped off with a blade to pay for goods. But looking far beyond mere commerce, a heavy silver ring given by a chieftain to a loyal follower was a profound, undeniably physical manifestation of an unbreakable oath. The intricate, endless braiding of the bright silver wires perfectly represented the permanent intertwining of lives, loyalties, and sacred promises. As you picture the smooth, cool, satisfying weight of the silver, gently reflecting the deep, pulsing orange embers of the dying hearth, the day truly begins to draw to a peaceful end. The central fires burn very low, leaving only a soft, pulsing and deeply comforting glow in the very centre of the quiet hall. The vast world outside prepares to turn entirely inward once more, as the soft purple shadows significantly lengthen and stretch gently across the woven tapestries. I offer these quiet reflections as a world-famous historian of Nordic antiquity, honoured with the Princess of Asturias Award for Social Sciences, entirely dedicated to guiding your peaceful rest. The fading golden light of the central hearth catches a subtle, pale gleam resting quietly on a nearby heavy wooden table. It is a collection of exquisitely small, heavily polished gaming pieces, each one meticulously carved from the dense, creamy tusk of a far northern walrus. To acquire this remarkable, beautiful material, daring sailors journeyed far beyond the edges of the familiar maps, sailing their wooden ships into the freezing, iceberg-laden waters of the high, unforgiving Arctic. The walrus ivory they brought back was not cold and brittle like ordinary stone. It possessed a unique, warm luster and a heavy, satisfying density that felt profoundly grounding when held securely in the palm of the hand. Master artisans used tiny, incredibly sharp iron blades to slowly, carefully shave away the pale layers, revealing gentle curves, miniature faces, and intricate, endlessly looping geometric patterns that could easily be hidden entirely within a softly closed fist. The sheer, terrifying vastness of the frozen northern ocean was miraculously distilled down into a tiny, elegant object designed purely for quiet, intellectual amusement during the long, dark winter nights. As you imagine the smooth, cool and heavy sensation of polished ivory resting gently in your own hand, you can feel the absolute stillness of those distant, icy waters, a beautiful, frozen silence that requires absolutely no effort to fully understand. That deep, encompassing silence profoundly shaped their entire fundamental understanding of time itself. In this ancient, softly lit world, there was no relentless mechanical ticking of clocks, no artificial sharp urgency to rush the mind or force the weary body into unnatural rigid rhythms. Time was a slow, fluid and highly localized companion. They divided the gentle, sweeping progression of the sun into 8 entirely organic, spacious phases known as Eikdir. These gentle phases were intimately tied to the specific physical rolling landscape surrounding the isolated farm. A particular moment in the day was simply and quietly recognized when the sun finally crested a familiar jagged mountain peak, or when the long purple shadows of the ancient pine trees finally reached the rocky edge of the dark, reflective water of the fjord. Time was not something to be anxiously measured, hoarded and spent. It was simply a natural, breathing environment to be peacefully inhabited. The bright day slowly exhaled into the cool evening, and the evening softly yielded to the deep, enveloping night. It is incredibly freeing to remember that the universe does not demand our rushing. The breath settles easily and naturally into this slower, ancient rhythm. The mind can simply drift, unanchored from the modern pressure of the hour, moving only at the natural, unhurried, majestic pace of the turning earth. As the evening shadow smoothly climbs the rough-hewn wooden walls of the longhouse, it merges perfectly with the very landscape itself, because the home and the earth were never truly separate entities. Looking up at the low, sweeping roofline from the outside, you would not see harsh tiles or stark grey stone, but a thick, living and breathing blanket of vibrant green turf. To create this magnificent insulating canopy, the builders carefully stripped the papery, waterproof bark from the silver birch trees, layering it thickly over the heavy, load-bearing timber rafters. Over this golden bark they laid incredibly dense, heavy squares of deep, root-filled earth. In the brief, bright summer months, Wild white daisies, soft mosses, and long swaying meadow grasses would naturally sprout from the roof, transforming the house into a living camouflaged extension of the rolling hills. In the deep bitter winter, this massive weight of frozen earth and dormant roots acted as the ultimate natural insulation, perfectly trapping the ambient golden heat of the hearth fires inside. The dwelling was a gentle, protective embrace from the earth herself, offering a profound, deep-seated sense of rootedness and absolute security against the howling, icy winds of the northern storms. You can almost smell the rich, damp earth of the ceiling above, a comforting, grounding aroma that promises warmth, safety, and profound stillness until the spring. Deep beneath that soft, protective layer of moss and soil, in the quiet, mysterious, waterlogged peat bogs of the hidden valleys, lay an almost magical, completely hidden potential. We often think of iron as something violently and aggressively mined from the deep, hard rock, but in the north, they practiced a far more delicate, muddy and patient alchemy. They harvested what is known as bog iron. Over thousands of years, as mineral-rich groundwater slowly filtered through the dense, acidic roots of the deep peat, it naturally deposited tiny, reddish-brown, pea-sized nodules of raw iron directly into the damp earth. In the quiet, still days of late summer, people would wade slowly into the shallow, rusty-coloured waters, using simple wooden tools to gently pull this raw, hidden strength directly from the soft, yielding mud. The mesmerising, transformative process of turning that wet, crumbling, intensely red earth into a glowing, impenetrable iron axe or an impossibly delicate sewing needle required immense patience, intensely hot charcoal fires, and the rhythmic musical ringing of the blacksmith's heavy hammer. It is a beautiful, perspective-widening reminder that incredible strength, sharp utility, and enduring resilience can be quietly gathered from the softest, wettest, and most yielding places in the natural world. The alchemy of water, earth, and fire worked in perfect harmony, a slow magic born of careful observation. The earthy, rust-coloured mud of the iron bogs contrasts spectacularly with a brilliant glowing treasure found much further south, washed upon the pale, sandy shores of the Baltic Sea after a heavy, churning storm. Here, people walked the quiet tide line in the soft, misty mornings, searching patiently for pieces of raw amber entangled in the dark, wet seaweed. This was fossilized tree resin, created by massive ancient pine forests that had stood and completely vanished millions of years before the first humans ever walked the ice. The people of the north revered it deeply, calling it the golden tears of the goddess Freya, shed as she searched the entire world for her lost love. When you hold a rough, unpolished piece of amber up to the pale, low winter sun, it catches the light with an incredibly warm, honey-coloured luminescence, sometimes revealing tiny, perfectly preserved fragments of ancient moss or microscopic prehistoric air bubbles trapped forever within its golden, translucent depths. Unlike cold, hard gemstones that pull heat from the skin, amber is wonderfully warm to the touch, almost vibrating with a hidden ancient sunlight. Your own body grows a little heavier, warmed by this imagined golden light, sinking deeper into a state of absolute, unconditional comfort and deep, uninterrupted peace. The preserved, ancient forests held quietly within the amber give way to a much more fragile, papery, and immediate use of the trees that completely surrounded their everyday lives. Not all of their written memories and important thoughts were boldly carved into massive monumental runestones, designed to endure for eternity. In the bustling, timber-lined alleyways of coastal trading towns, people communicated through incredibly delicate, intimate whispers of wood. They peeled the thin, flexible, and incredibly resilient white bark from the silver birch trees to use as a natural, readily available everyday paper. Using a simple, pointed stylus made of polished bone or iron, they quickly scratched highly casual, deeply personal, and everyday runic messages directly into the soft, yielding bark. They folded these small wooden letters tightly and handed them to travelling merchants or friends. Archaeologists have found these fragile earthy notes perfectly preserved in the damp soil. A merchant ordering more dyed wool, a wife playfully telling her husband to come home from the local tavern, a friend sharing a simple, fleeting joke. These papery whispers bridge the massive, silent gap of 1,000 years, revealing a profoundly recognizable everyday humanity. The fragile, temporary nature of the birch bark makes the survival of these quiet, ordinary moments all the more beautiful, resonant, and profoundly touching. The quiet, rhythmic scratching of the stylus against the birch bark seamlessly fades into the soft, vibrating notes of a deeply melancholic, beautiful melody. In the darkest, most secluded and warmest corner of the timber hall, a musician sits with their eyes gently closed, holding a beautifully carved, deeply resonant instrument known as the Kravic lyre. It is small enough to rest comfortably against the chest, its smooth, deeply oiled wooden body acting as a perfect acoustic chamber for 6 or 7 strings meticulously crafted from twisted horsehair or carefully prepared animal gut. When softly plucked with the fingertips, the lyre does not produce a loud, sharp, or commanding sound. Instead, it emits a soft, incredibly warm, humming resonance that seems to vibrate directly through the very floorboards of the Great Hall. The deep, continuous, overlapping notes create a soothing atmospheric drone, a hypnotic ambient soundscape that perfectly mirrors the endless howling wind outside, yet completely tames it with beautiful, mathematical harmony. Listen to that gentle, vibrating hum in your mind, feeling its steady, even frequency gently unwinding any lingering tension in your jaw, smoothing your forehead, and lulling the entire room into a shared, profound, and completely safe musical trance. The music does not ask for your attention. It simply exists in the background, a warm blanket of sound wrapping around your tired thoughts. The deeply vibrating, resonant notes of the wooden lyre echo outward, carrying our wandering thoughts seamlessly into the vast, silent, snow-dampened forests of the high, majestic mountains. Here, the rugged landscape is buried under 10 feet of pristine, untouched white powder, creating an environment of absolute, total, and profound silence. Yet, a solitary figure moves effortlessly through this frozen, blinding dreamscape, completely defying the deep snow and the freezing air. Long before skiing became a modern recreation, it was an elegant, ancient, and highly necessary art form of winter survival and graceful travel. They carved beautifully long, incredibly smooth wooden planks, often curving the delicate tips upward to perfectly ride over the unbroken powder. Sometimes, they used a longer ski on one foot for a smooth, endless, sweeping glide, and a shorter one wrapped securely in thick animal fur on the other foot to push off without slipping backward. The only sound in the entire vast world is the mesmerizing, rhythmic, whispering hiss of the oiled wood passing smoothly over the crystalline surface of the snow. They worshipped Ula, a powerful god of the winter who was a masterful archer and skier, representing the breathtaking freedom of gliding silently through a dormant, sleeping world. Feel the effortless, weightless momentum of that glide, a perfect, frictionless movement through the cold, crisp air. Looking up from the hypnotic, unbroken, and perfectly parallel trail of the skis, your gaze is drawn to a spectacular, breathtaking burst of movement high in the pale, frosty sky. Above the jagged, snow-covered canopy of the dark green pines, a magnificent bird circles with powerful, deliberate, and entirely unhurried strokes of its wings. This is the pure white gerfalcon of Greenland, an undisputed, majestic master of the cold, thin air. In the highly complex, interconnected world of medieval trade, these large, fiercely intelligent, and hauntingly beautiful raptors were considered the absolute pinnacle of luxury and diplomatic power, gifted solely to distant emperors and foreign kings to secure vital alliances. Yet, in their natural wild habitat, they represented something far more profound and untamed. To watch a massive, completely white falcon seamlessly blend into the blinding backdrop of a swirling snowstorm is to witness pure, unburdened grace. They possessed a terrifyingly precise, far-reaching vision, capable of seeing the tiniest movement from impossible, dizzying altitudes. As you imagine the silent, soaring arc of the falcon's majestic flight, you can feel a deeply profound sense of vast, open space. An unburdened, soaring freedom that lifts the mind entirely out of the heavy, terrestrial world, allowing it to float peacefully above the clouds. There is no rush up here, only the steady currents of the wind carrying you ever forward, light as a single detached feather. The magnificent falcon eventually returns to its hidden, quiet nest in the high, sheer cliffs, and our wandering thoughts spiral gently back down, descending smoothly through the chimney smoke, returning to the very deepest, warmest centre of the longhouse. Here, in the most private, secluded and quiet alcoves of the grand hall, the concept of sleep itself was treated with profound respect and elaborate architectural care. The large, heavy wooden beds of the chieftains were not merely simple furniture, they were spectacular, intricately carved, completely secure sanctuaries designed for vulnerability. The thick, sturdy wooden posts at the head and foot of the bed were masterfully shaped into the imposing, watchful heads of magnificent animals. Fierce, stylized wolves, gentle, protective bears, or mythical, coiled serpents with their wooden eyes held perpetually wide open in the dark. These were highly intentional apotropaic marks, ancient protective symbols designed specifically and powerfully to ward off any lingering nightmares and to keep the vulnerable sleeper absolutely safe from the unseen, swirling spirits of the night. As you imagine lying within that heavy, sturdy, intricately carved wooden frame, you're surrounded by a silent, unwavering, and beautifully carved guard. The shifting, long shadows of the room are entirely friendly and deeply protective. The heavy timber walls breathe slowly with the rhythm of the dying fire, creating a perfect, unbroken circle of safety that gently holds you, preparing the weary mind to finally sink into a profound, restorative, and entirely protected rest. Within the deep, unbroken stillness of that protected night, the ambient heat of the room is held steady by a remarkable hidden marvel of natural geology. Resting quietly near the glowing embers of the central hearth are large, beautifully rounded cooking pots carved entirely from a solid, fascinating material known as steatite or soapstone. Unlike the sharp, unyielding and brittle granite of the towering mountains, soapstone is incredibly dense yet miraculously soft to the touch, possessing a smooth, almost powdery texture that feels exactly like a hardened ancient bar of soap. Master artisans could easily carve this yielding rock with simple iron knives, shaping it into elegant, sweeping bowls. But its true, life-sustaining magic lay in its profound relationship with fire. Soapstone absorbs intense heat incredibly slowly and deeply, and then, long after the flames have completely died down to soft grey ash, it continues to radiate a steady, even and comforting warmth into the cool air for many hours. Imagine placing your hands near that smooth, heavy stone bowl in the dark, feeling the invisible, gentle waves of stored thermal energy pressing softly against your open palms. It is a slow, enduring warmth, a quiet, geological memory of the fire that asks absolutely nothing of you, gently keeping the creeping shadows at bay while the world outside slumbers. The smooth, radiating surface of the warm stone contrasts beautifully with a completely different, surprisingly cool texture waiting patiently for the dawn. In a quiet, highly organised corner of the living space rests a large, flawless and heavy dome of solid, dark, translucent glass. This is a linen smoother, an elegant, highly prized domestic tool used to bring a crisp, beautiful finish to their finest, most delicate woven fabrics. After the sheer, pale linen garments were washed in the cool, rushing streams and dried in the crisp, high-altitude winds, they were laid perfectly flat across a long, polished piece of whalebone. The heavy, cool glass dome was then pressed firmly against the cloth, gliding back and forth in a slow, rhythmic, and incredibly satisfying motion. The sheer weight and perfectly frictionless, icy surface of the glass miraculously pressed away every single wrinkle and crease, leaving behind a fabric that was remarkably sleek, cool, and beautifully structured. Think of the deep, inherent satisfaction in watching those chaotic, crumpled folds slowly yield to perfectly smooth, unblemished order. Just as the heavy, sweeping glass irons out the chaotic wrinkles of the cloth, you can allow the steady, sweeping rhythm of your breathing to naturally smooth out any lingering, tangled thoughts of the day, leaving your mind a blank, calm, and perfectly untroubled surface. From the clean, freshly pressed scent of the smooth linen, the imagination drifts seamlessly toward a different, deeply refreshing aroma, one carried down from the dizzying, mist-shrouded altitudes of the high mountains. Long before heavy trading ships brought exotic, dried spices from the distant east, the people of the north intimately knew the wild, rugged topography of their own vibrant alpine gardens. Their most treasured flavour was a towering, majestic, and completely wild plant known as angelica. Growing wildly near the edges of ancient melting glaciers and alongside freezing crystalline mountain streams, angelica produced large, striking umbels of bright green star-like flowers. But it was the thick, hollow stalks that they prized above all else. When carefully sliced open, these vibrant green stems released an incredibly sweet, pungent, and deeply aromatic scent, a highly complex flavour somewhere between crisp, watery celery and dark, earthy licorice. Foragers would climb high into the silent, breathless altitudes specifically to harvest this fragrant plant, bringing bundles of it back to flavour their slow-cooked winter broths, or simply to chew the sweet stems raw as a revitalising treat. The taste was a direct, vivid distillation of the pure, untamed mountain air. Imagine inhaling that sharp, incredibly fresh, and sweet alpine scent, feeling the cool, expansive atmosphere of the high peaks, instantly clearing your mind and filling your lungs with absolute vibrant stillness. The sheer, dizzying height of those majestic mountain peaks eventually gives way to the deep, silent, snow-covered valleys below, where the approaching winter completely blankets the earth in a brilliant, blinding white. Moving through this soft, treacherous depth required not just human ingenuity, but a profound, empathetic care for the heavily relied upon animals that shared their difficult lives. The iconic, sturdy Icelandic horses, with their incredibly thick, heavy winter coats, were phenomenally strong, but their small, concentrated hooves would easily punch right through the fragile crust of the deep snow, leaving them exhausted and physically stuck. To protect their beloved, hard-working companions, farmers meticulously wove wide, circular snowshoes specifically designed for the horses. Using highly flexible young branches of hazel and willow, they bent the living wood into wide, tensioned hoops, lashing them securely together with strips of tough, waterproof animal hide. When carefully tied to the horses' hooves, these wide wooden webs beautifully distributed the heavy weight of the animal over a massive surface area. Instead of sinking helplessly into the drifts, the great shaggy beasts could walk almost as if they were floating directly on top of the powdery white ocean. It is a striking, beautiful image of partnership, the heavy, breathing warmth of the horse moving effortlessly across the delicate, frozen surface, entirely supported by the clever, protective weaving of human hands. That incredibly smooth, floating sensation over the winter snow mirrors, another absolutely extraordinary physical trait of these northern horses, a secret rhythm held deep within their ancient genetics. While most horses across the world naturally walk, trot and gallop, producing a bouncy, physically jarring ride for the traveller, the horses of the Viking age possessed an entirely unique, mesmerising fourth gear known simply as the tölt. When a horse shifts gracefully into this highly specialised flowing gait, they move their legs in a perfectly timed 4-beat sequence, where at least one hoof is always in continuous grounding contact with the earth. The result is a sensation of movement that completely defies the rough, uneven terrain below. The rider does not bounce violently upward with the steps. Instead, they experience an eerily smooth, continuous forward glide, almost as if the horse were rolling forward on invisible, perfectly balanced wheels. It was famously and proudly said that a skilled rider could carry a full, open wooden horn of honey-rich mead while riding at high speeds in the Tult without spilling a single precious drop. Picture the effortless, mesmerizing motion of gliding swiftly across a vast, rocky, moss-covered plain, entirely disconnected from the jarring impact of the stones below. Your own body feels that same, weightless forward momentum now, carried smoothly and safely through the landscape of sleep without a single sudden movement or disruptive jolt. The sensation of gliding smoothly over a vast open expanse leads the mind naturally back to the sea, where those magnificent sweeping wooden longships rode the rhythmic breathing swells of the dark ocean. We frequently imagine these open vessels as completely exposed, leaving the hardened sailors entirely at the mercy of the stinging salt spray and the freezing, indifferent rain. Yet, when the heavy iron anchor was finally dropped in a quiet, sheltered coastal bay, the ship was instantly transformed from a vehicle of harsh travel into a highly protected, colourful, and surprisingly cosy home. From the tall central mast, the crew would quickly drape massive, beautifully woven woolen tents that stretched outwards to securely cover the entirety of the open wooden deck. These expansive, heavy canopies were rarely a drab, simple canvas. They were often woven in brilliant, striking stripes of deep, contrasting colours, turning the quiet ship into a vibrant, floating pavilion. Beneath the heavy, water-resistant wool, the howling wind was completely silenced. The sailors could unroll their soft leather sleeping bags, light a small, carefully contained fire in a specialised metal brazier, and listen peacefully to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the dark water against the wooden hull directly beneath them. It was an ingenious instant sanctuary, an overlapping cocoon of wool and wood that wrapped the weary travellers in absolute enclosed warmth upon the cold, endless water. Inside that warm, enclosed and gently swaying woolen tent, the quiet hours of the evening were rarely spent in idle emptiness. The northern hands were always moving, drawn naturally to the deep, meditative comfort of necessary maintenance. A sound begins to echo softly through the contained space, a highly rhythmic metallic sliding, the patient, repetitive kiss of stone against iron. This is the sound of a blade being carefully, methodically sharpened against a fine-grained whetstone. These particular stones were not ordinary river rocks. The most highly prized sharpening stones in the known world were painstakingly quarried from a very specific, steep mountain in Eidsborg, Norway. The light grey schist found there possessed microscopic, perfectly aligned quartz crystals that could polish a dull iron edge to a terrifying, mirror-like perfection. Travelling merchants carried these small, smooth grey blocks across entire oceans, making them a universally recognised tool in every single household. The act of sharpening a tool is profoundly grounding. It requires steady, even pressure, a perfectly maintained geometric angle, and an unbroken repetitive stroke. Listen to that gentle, sweeping friction in your mind. The quiet, hissing sweep of the smooth stone slowly removing the dullness, restoring purpose and gleaming sharpness. The repetitive sound acts as a natural metronome, steadily slowing your heart rate, aligning your wandering focus into one singular, peaceful, and unbroken rhythmic wave. As the sharp, gleaming tools are carefully wrapped in oiled leather and put away securely for the night, the focus in the warm, floating tent shifts from the physical maintenance of iron to the beautiful, playful maintenance of the mind. In the soft, flickering, golden glow of the brazier, they engage in an art form that is part storytelling, part intellectual puzzle. The ancient northern poetry was built upon a highly complex, uniquely beautiful system of metaphors known as kennings. Instead of simply stating a common word, a master poet would creatively combine two entirely different concepts to form a vivid, miniature riddle that the listener had to actively decipher in their mind. A ship was not merely a ship, it was the steed of the waves. The wind was the wolf of the forest. Gold was the fire of the sea, and the simple morning dew was beautifully called the sweat of the earth. To listen to a skald recite this poetry was to walk slowly through a dense, glittering forest of imagery, where every single noun required a moment of quiet, satisfying revelation to understand. It was a deeply cooperative, intellectual dance between the speaker and the relaxed audience. Imagine the quiet joy of slowly unwinding these poetic knots in your mind, allowing your thoughts to play gently with the beautiful shifting imagery, finding deep, resonant satisfaction in the clever, unexpected connections between the earth, the sky, and the sea. The highly complex, beautifully interwoven structure of their poetry is perfectly mirrored in the incredibly resourceful, heavily textured materials they use to protect their bodies from the biting dampness of the world. While we often imagine them clad solely in heavy furs and thick woolen cloaks, the people living along the deep rocky fjords perfected an entirely different, highly unusual, and incredibly resilient textile: fish skin leather. By carefully saving the skins of the massive cod and salmon they pulled from the freezing waters, they engaged in a slow, fascinating process of tanning using the naturally acidic barks of willow and birch trees. The resulting leather was an absolute marvel of ancient engineering. Unlike mammalian leather, which has fibres running in only one direction, the microscopic fibres in a fish skin cross each other in a complex, overlapping three-dimensional grid. This structural marvel made garments crafted from fish leather incredibly light, highly flexible and astonishingly strong, but most importantly it was entirely perfectly waterproof. To wear a coat stitched from the scaled, shimmering skin of a great salmon was to essentially wear the protective armour of the river itself, easily shrugging off the heavy driving rain and the crashing ocean spray. Imagine running your fingertips over that soft, pliable, deeply textured surface, feeling the faint raised memories of the scales, a brilliant tactile reminder that nothing in nature was ever wasted, and everything held the quiet potential for beautiful, practical transformation. As the night deepens and the cold, heavy rain falls softly against the striped woolen tent, the final light of the evening is brought forth not by a roaring, crackling fire, but by something much smaller, much more intimate and profoundly peaceful. Resting gently on a flat wooden plank is a small, incredibly shallow bowl, once again carved from that beautifully soft, heat-retaining soapstone. This is a kola, a traditional ancient oil lamp. Instead of modern wax, the shallow depression is carefully filled with thick, clear, rendered fish oil or seal fat. Floating near the very edge is a simple, humble wick, formed from a piece of twisted, dried meadow moss, or a tiny scrap of unspun sheep's wool. When gently touched with a glowing ember, the mosswick catches, producing a tiny, perfectly steady, teardrop-shaped flame of brilliant golden light. The oil burns with astonishing purity, producing almost no smoke, only a soft, radiant glow that perfectly illuminates the immediate quiet space around it. The light is not aggressively meant to conquer the vast, imposing darkness of the night. It is only meant to gently hold a small, warm, and secure space for the closing thoughts of the day. Watch that tiny, perfect, golden flame in your mind's eye. It does not flicker or dance wildly in the draught. It breathes slowly, steadily, and completely at peace. The room grows exceptionally quiet. The sharp shadows soften deeply into velvet, and the solitary golden light prepares to lead us even deeper into the hidden, quiet wonders of a world slowly giving itself over to the deep, silent blanket of the northern night. It casts a long, slow-moving shadow across a small, unassuming wooden artifact resting quietly on a nearby chest. This is the Hypnotic disc, an incredibly ingenious, completely silent instrument of navigation. Long before the magnetic compass arrived in these freezing waters, sailors relied entirely on this beautifully carved wooden circle, known as a sun compass. In the absolute centre of the disc sat a small vertical wooden pin. By holding the disc perfectly level at midday, and carefully observing exactly where the shadow of the pin fell upon a series of deeply incised sweeping geometric curves, a navigator could accurately determine their exact latitude on the featureless shifting ocean. It was a tool that required deep, patient observation of the pale sky, brilliantly capturing the massive cosmic movement of the sun and translating it directly into a tiny readable shadow, resting safely in the palm of a hand. It is a profoundly beautiful realization that they did not navigate the terrifying ocean through brute force, but by quietly, intelligently aligning themselves with the slow, predictable, and deeply comforting mathematics of the solar system. The smooth, heavily handled wood of the sun compass gives way in the mind to an entirely different texture, one that is impossibly soft, deeply earthy, and gathered from the damp, shaded floors of the ancient pine forests. This is sphagnum moss, a brilliant, vibrant green plant that holds a quiet, life-saving magic hidden within its spongy, delicate fibres. The people of the north did not just see a simple ground cover, they recognised a deeply necessary natural sanctuary. Sphagnum moss is incredibly absorbent and naturally antimicrobial, possessing a unique chemical property that actively prevents the growth of harmful bacteria. Because of this miraculous trait, it was carefully gathered, dried in the wind, and used to thickly line the beautifully carved wooden cradles of newborn infants. It created a remarkably clean, perfectly insulated, and profoundly soft bed that kept the most vulnerable members of the community completely dry, warm, and protected during the bitter, howling winters. It reveals a comforting truth, that the dark, imposing forest was not merely a place of harsh survival, but a gentle, providing mother, offering a soft, protective embrace to the very youngest of lives. The quiet, measured breathing of a sleeping infant resting deeply in that soft, moss-lined cradle is accompanied by the faintest, most delicate of acoustic vibrations. It is not the loud, reverberating drone of the grand wooden lyre, but a tiny, whisper-quiet melody originating from a small, hollowed block of polished boxwood. Found perfectly preserved in the dark, waterlogged soil of ancient trading settlements, this tiny instrument is a beautifully simple set of panpipes, meticulously drilled with 5 small, perfectly graduated holes. It is so incredibly small it can easily be completely hidden within a gently closed fist, designed not for the roaring, crowded feasting hall, but for the quiet, solitary moments of deeply personal reflection. To play it requires absolutely no physical force, only the softest, most relaxed exhalation of breath across the smooth wooden rim, producing a breathy, bird-like tone that instantly calms the nervous system and slows the racing mind. As you imagine that soft, airy sound echoing faintly in the dark, allow your own breathing to naturally synchronize with its gentle rhythm. The air enters slowly, filling your chest with a cooling calm, and leaves effortlessly, carrying away any remaining lingering tension. The body grows noticeably heavier, sinking deeper into the absolute, unquestionable safety of this quiet, ancient moment. The warm, rhythmic exhales of the panpipe melody drift seamlessly into a completely different sensory experience, an aroma that seems entirely miraculously out of place in this frozen, snowbound landscape. Secured tightly inside a small, beautifully tooled leather pouch, hanging securely from a resting traveller's belt are tiny, shriveled, incredibly potent treasures. Dried cloves and tightly curled fragments of thick cinnamon bark. We frequently imagine the ancient north as a completely isolated, frozen edge of the world, cut off by ice and violent seas, but the historical reality was vastly more expansive and beautifully interconnected. through highly complex, sprawling networks of winding rivers and overland trade routes, stretching all the way to the bustling, sun-drenched markets of the Middle East and the distant, vibrant reaches of Asia. These warm, equatorial spices slowly, patiently, made their way into the freezing Arctic. In the absolute darkest, coldest depths of the long northern winter, a single, tiny clove dropped into a steaming cup of honeyed wine would release a sudden, intense burst of equatorial sunshine. It is a remarkable, perspective-widening reminder that even in the most isolated, snow-covered valleys, the people held a tangible, intensely aromatic connection to the very centre of the vast, spinning globe. The microscopic, highly concentrated flavour of those distant spices perfectly mirrors another tiny, spectacular marvel of patience and impossible precision unfolding in the quiet workshops. When we envision their metalwork, we naturally think of massive, heavy iron swords or thick, chunky silver arm rings, but their master silversmiths also practiced an art form of dizzying, microscopic delicacy, known beautifully as filigree and granulation. Sitting entirely still, their breath shallow and measured, for countless hours near the faint glowing embers of a highly controlled forge, an artisan would patiently draw pure silver out into highly flexible wires, significantly finer than a single strand of human hair. Using tiny, delicate tweezers, they would weave these nearly invisible wires into intricate, endless looping knots, and patiently solder hundreds of microscopic, glittering silver dust spheres onto the curving surface of a dome-shaped brooch. The sheer scale of this work is so impossibly small that the individual details are barely visible to the naked eye from a mere arm's length away. It represents a profound, beautiful dedication to creating a private, hidden perfection, an intricate, glittering cosmos crafted entirely for the intimate, quiet pleasure of the wearer, requiring an absolute, breath-holding stillness to successfully achieve. That intense, microscopic focus of the silversmith gradually softens into the smooth, familiar, and highly practical curvature of a much more common, deeply cherished daily companion. In the quiet blue hours of the morning, as thick, warm oat porridge is served from the central soapstone pot, each person calmly reaches for their own, highly personal wooden spoon. These were rarely generic, mass-produced utensils shared indiscriminately among the sprawling household. A spoon was typically carved by the very person who used it, patiently whittled from a single chosen piece of fine-grained birch or pale, sturdy maple wood. Over years and decades of constant, daily, repetitive use, the wood would naturally absorb the oils of the hands and the gentle, polishing friction of the lips, slowly wearing down in a completely unique asymmetrical pattern that perfectly, flawlessly fit the exact, familiar grip of its owner. It was a humble object that literally grew with you, aging gracefully alongside your body, transforming from a simple piece of forest timber into a beautiful, tactile ledger of nourishment, routine, and survival. Let the small muscles in your own hands completely relax right now, gently uncurling your fingers, fully releasing your invisible, waking grip on the world, finding a deep, resonant comfort in the smooth, worn textures of well-earned rest. As the hands physically relax and the heavy, solid reality of the waking world begins to softly blur and gently fade at the edges of your awareness, the mind prepares to cross the sacred, invisible boundary into sleep. For the people of the ancient North, entering the dream state was never viewed as a frightening loss of consciousness or a descent into meaningless random illusion. They held a profound, deeply beautiful belief in the Fylgja, an accompanying intensely protective spirit, or an ethereal extension of the soul itself. They believed that when the heavy physical body finally laid down to rest in the dark, the Fylgja was instantly freed to wander, often taking the majestic, fluid shape of an animal that perfectly reflected the resting person's inner nature. A silent, gliding white owl, a powerful, slowly lumbering bear, or a swift, silver-backed wolf moving through the pines. Sleep was an active, magical journey, a quiet time when the truest, most unbound version of yourself explored the vast spiritual landscapes hidden entirely just behind the thin veil of the waking world. It is a deeply comforting, empowering thought that as you drift off tonight, you're not simply shutting down, you're quietly, majestically embarking on a peaceful, soaring journey, securely guarded by the oldest, most natural and untamed parts of your own spirit. While the spiritual Fylgja silently wanders those vast, ethereal, silver-lit dreamscapes, a very real, softly breathing animal shifts comfortably in the physical shadows near the warm, glowing embers of the hearth. The heavy, rhythmic, incredibly satisfying thumping of a thick tail against the wooden floorboards reveals the comforting presence of a Norwegian elk hound or a robust, thickly furred Greenland dog. These highly intelligent, deeply intuitive canines were far more than mere utilitarian working animals used for herding or tracking in the harsh, rocky terrain. They were profoundly valued, fiercely loyal, and deeply loved companions of the hearth. The emotional bond between human and dog was considered so sacred, so utterly unbreakable, that they were frequently, carefully laid to rest alongside their masters, ensuring that neither would ever have to walk the strange, unknown paths of the afterlife completely alone. The incredibly thick, double-layered coat of the dog provided a living, breathing, radiant source of warmth in the drafty, freezing hall. Listening to the deep, steady, and utterly contented sigh of a sleeping dog in a quiet room provides a profound, anchoring sense of peace, a beautiful, shared, interspecies comfort that easily transcends all spoken languages and all vast eras of time. The dog's softly tufted triangular ears twitch gently at a sudden, subtle change in the air current, drawing our wandering attention slowly upward to a small, purposeful opening carved high up in the massive sloping timber wall. In an era long before the widespread common use of flat, clear glass panes, enclosed houses required a carefully designed opening to allow the thick, biting hearth smoke to continuously escape and the fresh, crisp, invigorating outdoor air to steadily enter the room. They called this highly functional, necessary opening the Vindaga, a word formed by beautifully and poetically combining the Old Norse word for wind with the word for eye. It literally, stunningly translates to the wind eye. This incredible, elemental metaphor completely changes how we fundamentally perceive a building. It gently suggests that the house itself is a living, breathing, conscious entity, equipped with a singular eye to quietly watch the swirling weather and deeply breathe in the wild spirit of the sky. This exact ancient poetic phrase miraculously survived the long destructive passage of 1,000 years, eventually transforming syllable by syllable into our modern English word, window. Every single time we look out at the quiet night, we are unknowingly speaking an ancient, beautiful poem, recognizing our homes as sheltered, watchful spaces silently observing the vast, breathing world outside. Stepping slowly outside through the heavy, iron-bound wooden door, you turn and look back up through that metaphorical wind-eye, only to find that the vast, freezing, crystal-clear expanse of the deep winter night is not entirely dark or still at all. The sky itself is miraculously, silently moving. High above the sleeping, heavily snow-covered valleys, the aurora borealis begins its breathtaking, majestic, and entirely soundless dance. Great, sweeping, luminous ribbons of ghostly pale green, deep, vibrating violet, and soft, shimmering pink slowly unfurl, fold, and twist across the absolute black backdrop of stationary, glittering stars. To the people standing in the freezing, crunching snow a millennium ago, this was not a distant scientific phenomenon of solar winds interacting with a magnetic field. It was a deeply spiritual, awe-inspiring display of raw cosmic power. Some believed it was the earthly reflection of the gleaming, perfectly polished armor of the Valkyries riding out into the darkness, while others saw the flickering, luminous, shifting arch of the Bifrost, the burning, beautiful rainbow bridge permanently connecting the fragile realm of humanity to the eternal realm of the gods. To stand beneath that immense, silent, pulsing curtain of light is to witness the absolute grandeur of the natural world. It is a brilliant, completely soundless reminder that even in the very darkest, coldest, and most isolating depths of the long winter year, the universe is eternally capable of producing the most breathtaking ethereal light, gently watching over the sleeping earth until the warmth of the sun finally returns. While the magnificent sweeping lights of the aurora illuminated the entire vast canopy of the sky above, the brilliant minds of the ancient north were also deeply captivated by the absolute microscopic behaviour of light. Resting quietly in the palms of their hands, on the secluded windswept island of Gotland, masterful artisans crafted what we now call the Visby lenses. These were not mere decorative beads, but highly sophisticated, perfectly asymmetrical optical lenses meticulously ground from pure, flawless blocks of rock crystal. Using nothing more than a rudimentary wooden turning lathe and a finely graded abrasive powder, they shaped and polished the dense crystal into a perfectly precise, magnifying dome. When a craftsman held this heavy, icy clear stone over a piece of intricate bone carving, or a tiny, delicate piece of jewellery, the crystal miraculously bent the ambient light, vastly magnifying the microscopic details beneath it. It is a stunning, paradigm-shifting realization that these ancient people possessed the exact profound optical technology of a modern magnifying glass. Imagine the cool, smooth weight of that perfectly clear crystal resting easily in your fingers, a tiny frozen drop of pure water that has the magical, quiet power to bring the incredibly small, hidden details of the world into sharp, beautiful, and effortless focus. The pristine, unscented clarity of that polished rock crystal stands in deep, earthy contrast to the rich, heavy, and universally present aroma that permeated almost every aspect of their travelling lives. If you were to walk through a coastal settlement or stand near the curving hull of a resting longship, the air would be incredibly thick with the deep, smoky, sweet and resinous scent of pure pine tar. This thick, dark amber liquid was not simply slapped onto the wood. It was carefully, lovingly massaged deep into the overlapping oak planks using large, soft bundles of horsehair. The tar acted as an impenetrable, intensely fragrant seal, protecting the timber from the corrosive, biting salt of the sea and the relentless driving rain. The smell is incredibly grounding, a highly concentrated, deeply woodsy aroma that instantly evokes the feeling of a dense, ancient forest baking slowly under a warm summer sun. It was the scent of preservation, a fragrant promise that the vessel would hold strong against the terrifying, swirling chaos of the open ocean. Breathe in deeply through your mind's eye, letting that rich, smoky, amber scent fill your chest, a deeply protective aroma that instantly signals safety, endurance, and the warm, enduring strength of the great northern pines. That deep, resinous scent of the preserved timber seamlessly gives way to a surprisingly sweet, crisp, and incredibly fragile aroma carefully hidden deep within the belly of an ancient ship. When archaeologists finally unearthed the magnificent sweeping Oseberg ship from its dark, muddy tomb, they discovered an object of incredibly touching, perishable beauty resting quietly in the shadows. Placed carefully inside a beautifully carved wooden bucket was a collection of over 50 wild northern apples. In the complex, highly symbolic mythology of the time, apples were profoundly sacred, guarded by the goddess Idun, and they represented the promise of eternal youth, sweetness, and the everlasting spring that patiently waits beneath the heavy winter snow. To carefully place a bucket of fresh, tart apples into a dark wooden burial chamber was a profoundly gentle, hopeful gesture. It was a sweet, vibrant provision for the eternal journey, a splash of bright, cheerful red against the dark, earthy brown of the carved oak. It is a beautiful, deeply relaxing reminder that even in the face of absolute vast eternity, the simplest, quietest pleasures, the crisp snap of a fresh apple, the taste of sudden bright sweetness, were considered the most valuable, comforting treasures to carry forward into the unknown. The smooth, taut skin of those preserved, ruby-red apples contrasts beautifully with the impossibly soft, yielding texture of the garments that wrapped the people during the freezing, unforgiving months. We often think of coarse, scratching, heavy wool when we imagine ancient winter clothing, but the deeply observant weavers of the north understood the profound, hidden duality of the Icelandic sheep's fleece. Instead of roughly shearing the animal with iron clippers, women would patiently, gently pluck the wool by hand during the natural spring molting season. They then engaged in an incredibly slow, highly meditative process of completely separating the fleece into two entirely distinct layers. The outer layer, called the tog, consisted of long, coarse, intensely water-resistant hairs that would easily shed the heavy driving rain. But hidden beneath that rugged exterior was the thel, an impossibly fine, incredibly short, and deeply downy undercoat. The thel was so miraculously soft that it rivaled the finest, most luxurious modern cashmere, trapping the body's radiant heat in a weightless floating cloud. Imagine running your relaxed, open hand over a thick knitted blanket made entirely of this downy thel. It is so soft it almost feels like touching warm, solid air. Your own body grows much heavier now, sinking comfortably into the mattress, while your breathing perfectly settles. Your mind can simply drift into this absolute softness, knowing that nothing needs to be held too tightly. From that formless, floating cloud of soft, separated wool, a quiet, mesmerizing rhythm begins to slowly, patiently emerge in the corners of the grand hall. To transform those loose, delicate fibers into a single, strong, unbroken thread, the spinner used a simple, perfectly balanced wooden stick weighted at the very bottom by a small, beautiful object known as a spindle whorl. These heavy, stabilizing discs were meticulously crafted from smooth, polished soapstone, heavy clay, or brilliant translucent glass, often deeply carved with intricate looping patterns. The spinner would expertly twist the raw wool and release the weighted spindle, letting it drop toward the floor. As it fell, the whirl would spin incredibly fast, a perfect, mesmerizing blur of motion that tightly wound the loose fibers into a dense, unified yarn. The absolute steady rhythm of the drop, the long continuous spin, and the slow gathering pull back up into the hand is intensely hypnotic. It is a perfect, endlessly repeating pendulum motion that pulls order directly out of chaos. If you watch that spinning, blurring disc in your mind, you can feel the chaotic, racing thoughts of your own day being slowly, methodically wound down, smoothed out, and gathered into a single, unbroken line of quiet, peaceful intention. That smooth, twisting motion of the spun yarn gracefully transitions into the elegant, sweeping curve of a magnificent, polished drinking horn, resting gently on a long wooden table. While these iconic curved vessels were beautifully adorned with intricate shining silver rims and elaborate gleaming terminal caps, their most remarkable sensory secret was hidden entirely on the inside. Because the natural hollowed horn of a cattle beast can be highly porous and impart a slightly harsh, earthy taste to the liquid within, the craftsmen utilized a brilliant, fragrant solution. They carefully heated blocks of pure golden beeswax, pouring the melted liquid sunlight directly into the hollow curve and swirling it slowly until it created a perfectly smooth, completely impenetrable and wonderfully sweet-smelling internal lining. When you lifted the heavy, decorated horn to take a slow, satisfying draught of dark, rich ale or fermented honey mead, your lips would not touch rough, untreated bone. Instead, you were greeted by the incredibly smooth, soft and slightly yielding texture of the golden wax, accompanied by the faint, deeply comforting floral scent of 1,000 distant summer blossoms. It is a tiny, hidden detail of supreme comfort, a gentle, sensory sweetness, completely concealed within a rugged, imposing exterior, waiting quietly to reward the weary traveller. The elegant sweeping and natural curvature of the drinking horn perfectly mirrors the most famous, mesmerizing, and deeply hypnotic artistic style developed during the twilight of their era. This was the urn style, a breathtaking method of wood carving that completely abandoned harsh, rigid lines in favor of fluid, endless, and impossibly complex motion. Artisans would carve the heavy oak portals of their buildings with incredibly elongated, slender animals, often gentle, stylized deer or mythical curling serpents that looped, crossed, and intertwined in a flawless, perfectly balanced figure-8 pattern. The lines were carved with varying, highly deliberate depths, creating a stunning three-dimensional illusion of deep, shifting shadows and bright, raised curves. To look at Nirness carving is to watch a still, silent object beautifully simulate continuous rolling movement. The eye is naturally drawn into the pattern, following a single curving line as it dips gracefully under another, emerges, loops back around, and infinitely continues without ever finding an abrupt end. It is a visual lullaby, an endless, smooth, scrolling loop that gently captures the wandering attention and rocks it softly back and forth. Let your mind trace those endless, flowing wooden curves, finding a deep, satisfying peace in the lack of sharp corners, resting easily in the continuous sweeping flow of the ancient design. That beautiful, unbroken continuity of the carving is wonderfully mirrored in a much more humble, yet profoundly life-sustaining wooden object that was passed down with fierce, protective reverence from one generation to the very next. In the dark, cool corners of the pantries, families kept a highly unusual, intricately carved wooden log or a series of interlocking wooden rings known as a kveik. This was not a piece of art. It was a living, breathing, resting home for their uniquely adapted strains of baking and brewing yeast. After a successful batch of thick, hearty bread or sweet dark ale was made, the baker would dip the carved wooden ring into the frothy, bubbling mixture, allowing the microscopic living yeast to settle deeply into the porous, textured grain of the wood. The ring was then completely dried and hung safely from the rafters, where the yeast would enter a deep, dormant, entirely peaceful slumber. Months, or even years later, when it was time to bake again, the dry wooden ring was gently submerged in warm water, magically and silently waking the sleeping yeast back to vibrant, bubbling life. It is an incredibly beautiful, expansive realization that the comforting, warm smell of rising bread in a home was literally biologically connected, through that single, resting piece of carved wood, to the bread baked by their ancestors hundreds of years before. The profound internal warmth of that freshly baked bread perfectly echoes the ultimate heavy and enveloping comfort, prepared for a traveller setting out across the vast, freezing landscapes. When a journey required sleeping under the vast, open and terrifyingly cold sky, they did not simply wrap themselves in loose, drafty cloaks. They carried a spectacular, incredibly heavy, and ingenious piece of survival gear known as a hudfat. This was a massive, carefully stitched sleeping bag constructed from two completely intact, incredibly thick and heavily wool-lined sheepskins. The pelts were sewn securely together with the thick, downy fleece facing entirely inward, creating a deep, immersive and heavily insulated pocket of absolute warmth. To slide carefully into a hudfat was to be instantly, entirely cocooned in a thick, unyielding layer of softness that perfectly trapped every single degree of the body's natural radiant heat. The heavy tanned leather on the outside functioned as an impenetrable windproof shield, while the thick curly fleece on the inside acted as a weightless floating embrace. Picture the deep, heavy, incredibly satisfying sensation of pulling that thick weighted leather up to your chin, feeling the immediate rushing contrast between the biting, freezing air resting just inches from your face and the absolute tropical warmth encompassing your entirely relaxed body. The sheer weight of the skins presses down perfectly, a deeply calming, grounding pressure that signals to every muscle that it is finally time to let go. Enveloped completely in that absolute heavy warmth, the final, quietest, and most important ritual of the entire day takes place in the very centre of the dark, breathing room. The massive, roaring flames of the long central hearth have finally burned down to a beautiful, low and fiercely glowing bed of deep orange coals. But a fire cannot simply be left to die entirely in the freezing north. It must be carefully, lovingly put to sleep. Using a specialised, long-handled iron tool, the head of the household gently, methodically pushes the bright, pulsing embers tightly together into a single, concentrated mound. Then, they carefully shovel a thick, heavy, completely suffocating blanket of fine, grey ash entirely over the glowing coals. This ancient nightly process is known as banking the fire. By starving the embers of rapidly moving air, the fire enters a deep, suspended state of hibernation. Beneath that pale, grey, silent blanket of ash, the intense golden heat is perfectly securely preserved all through the long, freezing night. It is a profoundly comforting, deeply peaceful image. The frantic, leaping and chaotic energy of the daytime fire is entirely calmed, tucked in safely beneath the ash, patiently waiting to be gently blown back into vibrant life with the coming of the dawn. Just like the banked fire, your own bright, waking consciousness is now softly covered, entirely protected and perfectly preserved in the deep, quiet, glowing centre of this peaceful night. As the grey, silent blanket of ash holds the fire in a deep, suspended hibernation, the stillness of the room is mirrored by a remarkable discovery found beneath the frozen earth of the north. Imagine a small, perfectly preserved wooden box, hidden away for centuries, and inside a collection of objects that seem entirely modern in their focus on personal care. These are specialised ear spoons, meticulously carved from the ivory of a walrus or the dense, polished bone of a stag. Long before the era of mass-produced plastic, the people of the Viking Age valued the quiet, meditative ritual of hygiene with an intensity that surprises our modern expectations. They would sit by the light of the waning day, using these tiny, elegant scoops to clean themselves with a patient, slow-motion precision. These objects were often worn openly on the chest, suspended from bronze brooches by delicate silver chains, shimmering like jewellery. It is a profound, perspective-shifting realization that even in a world of vast oceans and rugged mountain peaks, they prioritized the microscopic details of personal comfort. This reveals a culture that found dignity in the small, repetitive acts of self-care, proving that peace is often found not in the grand conquest, but in the quiet maintenance of the body. Tracing the smooth, ivory handle of such a tool in your mind, you can feel that same desire for cleanliness and order settling into your own thoughts, smoothing away the grit of the day. This focus on the small, intricate details of the body flows naturally into the broader, sweeping textures of the landscape, where even the most utilitarian materials were treated with a sense of wonder. Step out from the quiet hall and toward the edge of a frozen marsh, where the tall, slender stalks of flax sway gently in the frigid breeze. From these humble, reed-like plants, the people harvested the long internal fibres to create linen, a fabric that was cherished for its coolness, its strength, and its remarkable ability to become softer with every single wash. The process of transforming a tough woody plant into a sheer, breathable garment was an exercise in extreme patience, involving soaking the stalks in still water, beating them against stones and finally combing them through iron teeth until only the silk-like inner threads remained. Because linen was difficult to dye, it was often left in its natural pale, creamy white state, reflecting the soft light of the northern moon. To wear a linen tunic beneath a heavy woolen cloak was to experience a layering of textures, the soft, fuzzy warmth of the wool pressing against the crisp, smooth and cooling embrace of the flax. It is a sensory bridge between the wild, unrefined earth and the refined, patient labour of human hands. As you imagine the sensation of that cool, pale fabric against your skin, your own body feels lighter, more at ease, as if the weight of your surroundings has been replaced by the gentle, airy touch of the loom. The pale, creamy white of the natural linen reflects a light that seems to resonate with the very bones of the earth, leading our gaze toward the rugged limestone cliffs that border the deep fjords. Within the hidden crevices of these ancient stones, the people found a substance that was as much a tool of survival as it was a material for the imagination. This is chalk, a soft, crumbly and pure white mineral that they used to transform the appearance of their world. They would grind the chalk into a fine, powdery dust, mixing it with water and a binder made from rendered fats to create a brilliant, stark white paint. They applied this luminous mixture to the shields they carried upon the ships, creating a striking rhythmic pattern of white and red that could be seen from miles across the dark, undulating water. The chalk was more than just a pigment. It was a way of bringing light to the dark, of making the man-made world stand out against the deep greens and greys of the northern wilderness. It speaks to an innate human desire to leave a mark that is clear, bright, and undeniable. In the stillness of this moment, you might imagine a single, white chalk line being drawn across a smooth, dark stone, a simple and satisfying act of creation that clears the mind of clutter and leaves behind only a sense of bright, open space. The stark, bright clarity of the white chalk finds a surprising rhythmic echo in the way the people structure their entire social and legal world. While we often imagine this era as one of lawless wandering, it was actually governed by an incredibly sophisticated assembly-based legal system known as the Thing. Imagine a vast open meadow surrounded by a ring of ancient moss-covered stones where the entire community would gather under the open sky to settle disputes and speak the law. There were no dark courtrooms or hidden chambers. Justice was something that happened in the fresh air, in the presence of the wind and the sun. The laws were not written down in heavy books, but were held entirely within the memory of a chosen official called the law speaker, who would stand upon a high rock and recite the entire legal code from memory, his voice carrying over the silent listening crowd. This was a world where words had a physical weight, where the act of speaking the truth out of doors was a sacred, binding event. It reveals a society that deeply valued transparency and the collective voice of the people, finding peace in the shared understanding of right and wrong. As the law speaker's imagined voice fades into the rustle of the meadow grass, your own mind can settle into a state of quiet, orderly balance, knowing that there is a place for everything, and everything is in its proper place. Every few breaths, you may notice how the bed seems to rise up to meet you, supporting the natural curve of your spine as your muscles finally surrender their hold. The mind does not need to navigate the complexities of the law or the sea tonight. It can simply drift, like a leaf on the surface of a slow-moving river. There is no urgency to understand, only a permission to be. The open, grassy meadows of the assembly move seamlessly into the cool, shadowed depths of the communal storehouses, where the bounty of the summer was carefully preserved in a display of remarkable natural engineering. Resting in the darkness are large, heavy barrels made of heart oak, filled to the brim with a golden, viscous liquid that was the literal lifeblood of the north, honey. Because the northern climate was too harsh for many types of fruit, honey was the primary source of sweetness, gathered with great care from wild hives hidden in the hollows of ancient trees. But honey was far more than a luxury. It was a miraculous preservative, a substance that never spoils and possesses the power to keep anything submerged within it fresh for years. They used it to preserve precious berries, nuts, and even medicinal herbs, creating a deep, golden treasury of nutrition that would sustain them through the leanest months of the frost. To look into a vat of this thick, shimmering amber liquid is to see the captured energy of 1,000 summer blossoms, held in a state of perfect, unchanging stillness. It is a beautiful, grounding metaphor for the way we can store our own moments of joy and warmth, keeping them safe and untarnished deep within the mind. Imagine the slow, heavy drip of golden honey from a wooden spoon, its thick, rhythmic motion lulling your senses into a state of warm, syrupy relaxation. The golden amber hue of the honey finds a different, more crystalline expression in the way the people perceive the very air around them during the shifting of the seasons. As the autumn air turned sharp and the first frosts began to lace the edges of the leaves, a peculiar and beautiful phenomenon would occur on the surfaces of the still ponds. This is the formation of needle ice, where the water freezes into long, slender and incredibly delicate filaments that grow vertically from the moist soil or the water's edge. The people of the north watch these tiny glass-like towers with a sense of quiet reverence, seeing in them a sign that the earth was beginning its long, transformative sleep. These ice needles are so fragile they shatter at the slightest touch, yet they possess a structural elegance that mirrors the most complex metalwork of the era. This reveals a deep observational intimacy with the environment, where the smallest change in the state of water was a cause for reflection. It reminds us that beauty is often found in the most transient, delicate moments, the brief shimmer of a frost needle before the sun rises. In your mind, you can watch these tiny towers of ice slowly melt back into the dark, nourishing earth. A gentle reminder that all things have their season to rise and their season to dissolve back into the whole. The dissolving ice leads the senses back toward the warmth of the human touch, specifically to the incredible tactile world of the nail-binding stitch. While we previously touched upon the bone needle, the significance of the finished fabric itself deserves a slow, deliberate reflection. Imagine a pair of thick, heavy mittens, so dense they feel almost like felt, yet so flexible they move perfectly with the hand. These garments were not just clothing, they were a triumph of human resilience over the biting cold of the North Atlantic. Because each stitch was a separate, interlocking knot, the fabric held within it thousands of tiny pockets of trapped still air, creating an invisible thermal barrier that no wind could penetrate. When these mittens became wet from the sea spray, the woolen fibres would actually expand and tighten, making the garment even warmer and more windproof than when it was dry. It is a profound, counterintuitive truth that the very elements meant to freeze the body were used to activate its protection. This reveals a profound wisdom in working with the forces of nature rather than against them. Feel the imagined weight of that thick, knotted wool over your hands, a heavy, protective warmth that makes the rest of the world feel distant and inconsequential. The heavy, protective weight of the wool brings a sense of deep-seated security, allowing the breath to settle into a slow, effortless cadence. Each inhale is a cool, refreshing gift. Each exhale is a long, slow release of anything that no longer serves you. You are held by the history of the earth, safe in the cradle of the night. This sense of security was mirrored in the very way the people designed their furniture, turning the most basic household items into symbols of permanence and peace. Imagine a settle, a long, heavy wooden bench with a high back carved from a single, massive plank of seasoned oak. This was the seat of honour, placed carefully alongside the hearth, where the elders of the family would sit to watch the flames. The wood was not merely sanded smooth, it was polished with beeswax and linen until it possessed a deep, dark glow that seemed to hold the warmth of the fire even after the logs had turned to ash. The back of the bench was often carved with protective motifs, the valknut or interlocking triangles, and the heads of ravens, representing the watchful presence of the mind and memory. To sit on such a bench was to feel the literal support of the ancestors at your back, a solid, unyielding presence that shielded you from the drafts of the hall. It speaks to a culture that understood the importance of a steady centre, a physical place where one could remain unmoved while the world outside changed and shifted. In your mind, you can lean back against that cool, solid oak, feeling its strength transfer into your own spine, allowing your body to become as heavy and immovable as the ancient timber. The dark, polished grain of the oak bench finds a contrast in the light, airy, and rhythmic world of the tablet-weaving loom. Unlike the massive warp-weighted loom, this was a portable, intimate craft that could be done anywhere, by the fire, on the deck of a ship, or in the shade of a summer birch tree. The weaver used a series of small square cards made of bone or wood, each with a hole in the corner, to twist and turn the colourful silk and woolen threads into intricate narrow bands of trim. The sound of the tablets clicking together is a soft percussive music, a clack-clack that filled the quiet spaces of the day. These woven bands were then used to decorate the necklines and cuffs of tunics, adding a splash of brilliant colour and complex geometry to the simplest garments. It is a micro-novelty of engineering. By simply rotating the cards in different directions, an infinite variety of patterns could be created, from running vines to geometric diamonds. This reveals a restless, playful creativity that found joy in the infinite possibilities of a few simple threads. As you imagine the rhythmic clicking of those wooden cards, your thoughts can become like those threads, intertwining, overlapping, and finally forming a beautiful, coherent pattern that requires no effort to maintain. The colourful geometric patterns of the woven bands lead us finally toward the vast blue-grey scale of the coastline, where the people engaged in a form of architecture that was both monumental and strangely intimate. These are the boathouses, or norsts, massive stone-walled structures built specifically to house the longships during the winter months. They were built in the shape of the ships themselves, with curved walls that followed the elegant line of the hull. When the ship was pulled inside for its winter rest, the building became a hollow protective shell, a stone ribcage for the wooden heart of the community. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried seaweed and old rope, a quiet, cathedral-like space where the ship could be repaired and cared for away from the snow. This reveals a profound respect for the tools of their life. The ship was not just a machine, but a member of the family that required its own house, its own sanctuary. It is a beautiful image of the return, the long journey over, the vessel finally tucked away in its stone cradle, safe and dry. You can feel that same sense of the return in your own body now, as you pull the covers higher, settling into the stone-walled sanctuary of your own room, ready for the long, quiet winter of sleep. The scent of dried seaweed and old rope lingers in the cool air, a salty, weathered perfume that speaks of journeys concluded and rest well earned. There is a profound, heavy silence in the boathouse, a silence that is not empty, but filled with the memory of the waves and the promise of the coming spring. As the ship rests in its stone cradle, the mind too can find its own quiet harbour. We are stepping now from the rugged edges of the sea toward the soft interior world of the garden, where a different kind of history is waiting to be told through the roots and the leaves. Stepping just outside the heavy, sheltering timber walls of the dwelling, you might find a small, carefully enclosed patch of rich, dark earth known as a Laugardagur, or a cabbage garden. In a vast landscape often dominated by towering ancient pines and sweeping, untamed expanses of frozen tundra, this tiny, cultivated square was a profound act of gentle domestic hope. To protect the tender, emerging green shoots from the biting, relentless coastal winds and the wandering, hungry livestock, they built low, thick walls of stacked grey fieldstone. These heavy stones did far more than simply defend the fragile plants. They captured the radiant golden warmth of the brief summer sun during the long daylight hours, slowly and generously releasing that stored thermal energy back into the damp soil throughout the cool, pale nights. Inside this quiet, protected microclimate, hearty root vegetables and thick, dark green leaves of kale grew with patient, quiet determination. The smell of the wet earth after a sudden summer rain in this small enclosure was incredibly rich and deeply grounding. To tend this garden was to engage in a slow, deeply satisfying conversation with the earth itself, coaxing a vibrant, life-sustaining tenderness from a rugged, demanding environment. It reveals a beautiful, quiet optimism, a dedication to nurturing fragile life and creating a tiny, ordered sanctuary of bright green amidst the vast, sweeping greys and brilliant whites of the wild north. As the cultivated, vibrant green of the garden slowly fades into the russet, amber and gold of the surrounding autumn forest, a completely different kind of harvest begins beneath the towering canopy. Scattered generously across the damp, mossy floor of the woods, perfectly camouflaged among the fallen leaves, are thousands of small, smooth, flawless treasures, wild hazelnuts. Foraging for these energy-dense morsels was a peaceful, deeply communal rhythm of the late season. The satisfying, dull, wooden click of the hard shells being gathered and dropped into hand-woven willow baskets provided a gentle, percussive soundtrack to the crisp, cooling afternoons. These small nuts were an incredibly prized resource, essentially acting as tiny, naturally sealed capsules of rich, golden oil and vital, enduring calories that could be easily carried in a leather pouch on long ocean voyages, or stored safely in the dark, quiet corners of the pantry for the deepest, coldest months of the year. To sit quietly by the evening fire and slowly, methodically crack open the smooth, beautifully rounded shells was a nightly ritual of quiet, profound reward. The deep, earthy, roasted scent of the nuts warming gently near the glowing embers is intensely grounding and profoundly safe. It is a beautiful reminder of the deep-seated comfort found in simple, patient preparation, the deep, resonant satisfaction of knowing you have gathered exactly what you need to safely and warmly weather the coming dark. The reassuring, solid weight of the gathered harvest stored safely in the dry, cedar-scented pantry finds a fascinating, almost magical counterpart out in the cool, damp, sweeping expanse of the natural landscape, in a practice that perfectly highlights their deep, intuitive and brilliant collaboration with the environment. They utilize the unique chemical properties of the sprawling peat bogs as a vast, silent and entirely natural refrigerator. They would take large, beautifully crafted wooden kegs or securely sewn animal hides completely filled with freshly churned, rich, yellow butter and deliberately bury them deep within the dark, waterlogged and highly acidic peat. The surface of the bog, covered in bright green sphagnum moss, betrayed no secrets of the golden treasury hidden beneath. In this entirely oxygen-free, consistently cool subterranean environment, the butter simply did not spoil. Instead, over months or even years of silent underground slumber, it slowly fermented and miraculously transformed, taking on a complex, deeply earthy flavour while remaining perfectly preserved and highly nutritious. This bog butter became a highly valuable, concentrated currency of stored vital energy. To bury a heavy cask in the deep, yielding mud was an act of profound, unwavering trust in the earth, and knowing that the dark, quiet ground would safely hold and perfectly protect their vital nourishment. Your own body can rest just as securely right now, feeling heavy and completely supported, trusting the quiet darkness of the room to safely hold your resting mind until the gentle morning light arrives. That profound, organic connection between human intention and natural materials was also physically permanently woven into the very architecture of their grandest sweeping halls. We are so accustomed to the rigid, unyielding and often harsh grip of iron nails and steel screws, but the masterful builders of the ancient North employed a far more elegant, living and breathing solution known as tree nails, or trenegler. These were simply thick, incredibly smooth wooden pegs, often meticulously carved from dense, highly resilient oak or pale birch. When two massive timber beams needed to be permanently joined, the carpenters would bore a precise hole and drive the wooden peg firmly through the joint with the satisfying heavy thud of a wooden mallet. The air would fill with the sharp, clean scent of freshly shaved oak. As the inevitable damp chill of the autumn rains and heavy winter snows rolled through the misty valley, the wooden peg would naturally absorb the ambient moisture from the air. As it drank in the dampness, the wood would gently, powerfully swell and expand, completely filling every microscopic crevice of the hole, creating an incredibly tight, absolutely seamless, and perfectly weatherproof seal. Instead of rusting or weakening in the harsh, wet climate, the building actively used the damp weather to make itself permanently stronger. It is a brilliant perspective-shifting philosophy of yielding and adapting, allowing the immense wooden structure to quietly breathe and lock together in perfect harmony with the shifting, breathing world around it. This profound underlying philosophy of yielding to the immense, unavoidable power of nature, rather than stubbornly and foolishly fighting it, reached its absolute breathtaking pinnacle out on the open, terrifyingly vast ocean. The iconic sweeping longships were absolute masterpieces of clinker-built engineering, where the long, carefully shaped oak planks beautifully and symmetrically overlapped one another. However, their true, life-saving genius was not in their imposing rigidity, but in their astonishing, almost impossible flexibility. The dark, tar-sealed hull of the ship was intentionally designed to twist, bend, and smoothly undulate with the massive rolling energy of the deep sea waves, where a stiff, rigid, and heavily built vessel would tragically shatter under the crushing sudden force of a violent storm. The northern ship acted exactly like a living, breathing aquatic creature, gracefully flexing and effortlessly gliding over the swelling white-capped crests. The highly skilled sailors could actually feel the wooden deck actively moving and breathing beneath their soft leather shoes, a rhythmic wooden heartbeat perfectly, flawlessly synchronized with the immense pulse of the ocean. It reveals a deep ancestral and vital wisdom that true, lasting resilience does not come from standing completely stiff and unmoving against the raging storm, but from remaining incredibly supple, beautifully fluid, and entirely open to the immense, shifting currents of life. The sweeping, grey and endlessly moving canvas of that vast northern ocean occasionally delivered objects of such shocking, vibrant and unimaginable contrast that they seemed to have fallen directly from a vivid dream. Deep within the frozen, blue clay-sealed burial chamber of the spectacular Oseberg ship, modern archaeologists uncovered a tiny, delicate and profoundly unexpected treasure, resting quietly in the absolute dark, the unmistakable iridescent shimmering eye of a single peacock feather. This nearly weightless, brilliantly coloured plume, with its microscopic, perfectly overlapping barbs of emerald and sapphire, had travelled across thousands of miles of winding continental rivers, through bustling, spice-scented eastern bazaars, and over freezing, treacherous mountain passes to finally rest in the absolute permafrost of Scandinavia. It was a tangible, exotic and silent whisper of distant, sun-drenched empires, a fragile, weightless piece of absolute tropical beauty carefully carried to the very edge of the known icy world. To imagine that brilliant flash of luminescent blue and green against the dark, heavy, imposing grain of the ancient oak is to realise just how deeply, surprisingly interconnected their vast world truly was. It expands the perspective entirely, proving that even in the most isolated, snowbound and silent valleys, the imagination and the physical reach of humanity were beautifully, infinitely vast. You do not need to move a single muscle right now to let your own mind effortlessly and peacefully cross those same vast oceans of thought. The absolute breathless, freezing silence of that long-buried feather is gently broken in the imagination by a soft, airy, and deeply haunting sound drifting lazily through the cool evening air. Long before the invention of complex brass instruments or heavy pianos, the people of the North found delicate, beautiful and complex music hidden within the very anatomy of the natural world. They crafted simple, incredibly elegant flutes from the naturally hollow leg bones of sheep or the large sweeping wing bones of eagles and white swans. By carefully, patiently drilling 3 or 4 small, perfectly spaced holes along the smooth, polished, milky white surface, they created an instrument that did not roar or aggressively command attention, but simply and beautifully whispered. When played with a soft, steady, and entirely relaxed exhalation of warm breath, the cold bone flute produces a gentle, breathy, and incredibly pure tone that perfectly mimics the solitary, beautiful sound of the wind blowing across the high, icy, and untouchable fjords. It was intimate, deeply personal music, meant to be played softly by the fading fireside, a quiet, solitary meditation that transformed the physical remnants of a harsh life into a vessel for sweeping lyrical beauty. The soft, whistling sound is intensely calming, a steady, airy vibration that effortlessly soothes the nervous system and gently invites a deep, restorative stillness into the wandering mind. As that soft, breathy, and beautifully melancholic melody weaves its way through the dark, heavy, timbered hall, it is accompanied by the sudden, cheerful appearance of a tiny, intensely bright, and highly localized star. In the deepest, darkest, and most isolating hours of the winter, when the massive central hearth had finally burned down to a low, quiet, and pulsing hum, the need for personal, focused light was solved with incredible, natural, and fragrant ingenuity. They did not always rely on expensive beeswax or smoky, sputtering animal tallow. Instead, they harvested what is known as fat wood or splint wood. These were very thin, carefully split slivers of pine wood taken directly from the ancient, incredibly resin-saturated stumps of naturally fallen trees. When the tip of this sticky, amber-infused splinter was gently touched to a glowing ember, it would instantly catch, burning with a remarkably bright, steady, and gloriously sweet-smelling yellow flame. A single, thin stick could burn brightly for many minutes, casting long, slow-dancing shadows against the wooden walls, providing just enough perfect golden light to read a carved rune, effortlessly finish a woven seam, or safely navigate the dark, peacefully sleeping room. It is a beautiful, deeply comforting realization that the dark forest freely provided its own, perfectly scented natural candles. The rich, sharp, and intensely clean aroma of burning pine resin entirely fills the imagination, a clearing, purifying scent that gently washes away the heavy, lingering, and chaotic fog of the waking day. The warm, localized, and perfectly steady golden glow of that small pine torch perfectly illuminates a pair of relaxed hands engaged in a slow, highly hypnotic, and endlessly repetitive motion. Resting comfortably in the palm is a small, beautifully carved wooden tool that closely resembles a miniature two-pronged lyre. This is a lucette, an ingenious ancient implement used to create incredibly strong, square, and completely unyielding textile chords. The craftsperson slowly, methodically loops a thick strand of naturally dyed wool around the two smooth wooden horns, lifting the bottom loop perfectly over the top in a continuous, rhythmic, and entirely seamless figure-8 pattern. Unlike a simple, twisted rope that can easily and frustratingly unravel, the cord produced by the lucette is a complex interlocking chain that is astonishingly durable, typically used to securely fasten heavy woolen cloaks against the freezing wind or to pull tight the heavy, water-resistant leather boots. The motion of the hands is incredibly mesmerizing, a slow, patient, unbroken dance of the fingers pulling the lanolin-rich wool. It requires just enough gentle focus to quiet the anxious, racing mind, but not so much effort as to cause any physical fatigue. Let your own awareness gently follow that endless, looping figure-8 motion, feeling the deep, satisfying rhythm of simple, continuous creation, slowly unwinding any remaining stubborn knots of tension hidden deep within your shoulders. The strong, perfectly uniform and newly woven woolen cord is finally used to carefully secure a beautiful, highly prized, and profoundly unique object to a weary traveller's leather belt. When a skilled woodworker walked through the silent, snow-dusted, and deeply shadowed birch forests, they did not just look for straight, towering, perfect trunks. They kept a keen, highly observant eye out for the strange, bulbous, seemingly chaotic, knotty growths that occasionally formed on the sides of the trees known as burls. While these heavy burls appeared rough, distorted, and unappealing on the outside, the master carver knew the spectacular, breathtaking secret hidden deep within the wood. When a burl was carefully harvested from the tree, sliced cleanly open, and painstakingly hollowed out with curved iron blades to create a small personal drinking bowl, the wood inside revealed a breathtaking, chaotic, and completely mesmerizing galaxy of swirling grain. Because the strong fibers inside the burl twist and turn in every possible overlapping direction, a bowl carved from this wood is virtually impossible to crack or split, making it incredibly, dependably durable for a lifetime of travel. But its true, lasting value was in its abstract, completely natural beauty. To hold a smooth, beeswax-polished burl bowl in your resting hands is to hold a tiny, captured whirlpool of wood, a chaotic tangle of life that has been patiently, lovingly smoothed into a perfect, functional, and deeply comforting vessel. The rough, uneven, and demanding exterior of the waking day has been entirely carved away, leaving only the smooth, swirling, and deeply peaceful beauty of the night, ready to be filled with the quiet, still, and restorative waters of rest. Within those quiet, still, and profoundly restorative waters, the mind can safely wander to the very edges of the waking settlement, where a small, shallow pool of freshly melted snow perfectly reflects the pale, expansive morning sky. Kneeling quietly at the muddy edge of this tiny, temporary ocean is a child, deeply engrossed in a world of pure imagination. Resting delicately on the surface of the puddle is a miniature, flawlessly carved wooden longship. The master shipwright, the very same heavily muscled artisan who spent his days swinging a massive iron broadaxe to fell towering ancient oaks for the great ocean-faring vessels, had used his quietest evening hours and his finest, sharpest carving knives to shape this tiny toy from a scrap of soft-yielding pine. Every sweeping curve of the prow, every miniature overlapping plank was rendered with the exact same mathematical precision and profound respect as the grand warships. It is a stunning, breathtaking shift in scale. A deeply touching act of tenderness that proves the ancient North was not merely a world of harsh survival and endless labour. It reveals a society that deeply valued the quiet sanctity of play, understanding that the grandest, most sweeping sagas of human exploration often begin as quiet, solitary, imaginary voyages across a rain puddle. To hold that tiny, weightless wooden ship in the palm of your hand is to feel the immense protective love of a parent, patiently scaled down to perfectly fit the grasp of a child. The damp, earthy scent of the puddle perfectly introduces the brilliant, highly intuitive way they protected themselves from the constant biting moisture of the marshlands. When a master leatherworker crafted a pair of everyday shoes, they did not simply stitch the thick, tanned cowhide together from the outside, which would leave a highly vulnerable, exposed seam entirely at the mercy of the wet grass and the sharp, abrasive gravel. Instead, they employed a brilliant, almost paradoxical technique to create the famous turn shoe. They would soak the heavy leather in warm water until it became incredibly supple and pliable, and then they would painstakingly sew the entire shoe completely inside out. The intricate, tight linen stitches were pulled taut using specialized bone needles, securing the edges with flawless tension. Once the stitching was finally complete, the leatherworker would use all of their physical strength to forcibly, miraculously, turn the wet leather right side out, folding the entire vulnerable seam completely inward against the foot. The result was a spectacularly smooth, unbroken, and highly aerodynamic barrier against the world, completely hiding the fragile threads from the elements. It is a brilliant metaphor for protecting one's own vulnerabilities, a physical reminder that the most essential, delicate parts of ourselves can be safely turned inward, entirely shielded from the rough, abrasive friction of the outside world. The sharp, precious bone needles used to meticulously stitch that heavy leather were far too valuable to be carelessly left on a wooden table or lost in the deep shadows of the rush-covered floor. When the sewing was finally done for the evening, the needle was carefully returned to a tiny, incredibly secure sanctuary. Hanging elegantly from the gleaming domed turtle brooches on a woman's woolen dress, suspended by a delicate chain of bright silver or polished brass, was a small, exquisitely crafted needle case. These tiny cylindrical tubes were meticulously carved from the hollowed wing bones of large waterfowl, or cast from brightly polished bronze, often deeply etched with intricate swirling geometric patterns. At the very top, a tightly fitted wooden or leather plug sealed the opening. Tucked entirely inside the dark, dry centre of the tube was a small, naturally oily tuft of unspun sheep's wool. The iron needle was pressed gently into this soft lanolin-rich cushion, which actively prevented the damp sea air from rusting the precious metal. It was an environment of absolute perfect preservation, a tiny, highly organised micro-world dedicated entirely to keeping a single, vital tool safe, sharp, and flawlessly ready for the next day. As you imagine the absolute security of that tiny enclosed space, your own body can begin to mirror that profound sense of protected rest. The breath settles into a beautiful, slow, rhythmic tide, rising and falling without any conscious effort. The heavy, tired muscles of the back, the shoulders, and the jaw finally sink deeply into the mattress below. You're entirely safe to close yourself off from the loud, demanding rush of the waking world, trusting completely that everything important is securely held, allowing your mind to become a quiet, empty sanctuary. From the quiet, dark safety of the needle case, a sudden, brilliant, and almost magical burst of energy flashes into existence. In the deepest, freezing depths of the winter night, creating a fire was not a simple, automated convenience. It was a highly practiced, rhythmic, and mesmerizing physical art. The firemaker held a specialized piece of high-carbon iron, known as a striker light, which was beautifully forged with gracefully curled, sweeping ends that closely resembled a tiny abstract musical instrument. In their other hand, they held a sharp, jagged piece of pure, translucent quartz, or hard grey flint. With a steady, deliberate, and perfectly angled strike, the iron was brought sharply down against the unyielding stone. The sharp, percussive clack echoed in the dark, instantly accompanied by the mesmerizing birth of a spark. It was a microscopic, brilliant orange star, violently chipped from the cold stone, falling softly onto a prepared bed of charred linen or dry, powdery fungus known as charcloth. The tiny glowing ember would catch, pulsing with a fragile red heat in the absolute darkness. The firemaker would then cup the ember in their hands, lean in incredibly close, and blow a long, slow, steady stream of warm breath to coax the fragile spark into a roaring, life-sustaining flame. To watch this process is to witness the literal breathless creation of light from cold stone, a quiet, repetitive magic that instantly banished the shadows and brought intense, radiant comfort to the frozen world. The roaring, crackling heat of that newly born fire leads our wandering thoughts directly into the intense, glowing heart of the blacksmith's forge, where the true, breathtaking alchemy of the ancient North took place. We frequently imagine the heavy iron swords of the era as simple, dull, grey slabs of utilitarian metal, but the master weaponsmiths practiced a technique of metallurgical poetry known beautifully as pattern welding. Deep within the blinding, white-hot roar of the charcoal fire, the smith would take multiple, alternating rods of hard, high-carbon steel and softer, flexible iron. They would heat them until they were glowing bright orange, then physically twist them tightly together like strands of warm taffy. They folded the metal over, hammered it flat, heated it again, and twisted it in the opposite direction. When the blade was finally cooled, polished to a mirror shine, and dipped in a mild, acidic wash of fermented fruit or sour ale, a breathtaking hidden universe was suddenly revealed. The surface of the cold, deadly steel was completely covered in dark and light bands that perfectly mimicked the hypnotic, swirling eddies of rippling water or the interlocking, mesmerizing scales of a coiled serpent. It is a stunning, beautiful paradox. The smiths managed to capture the fluid, chaotic and sweeping motion of a rushing river, permanently freezing it into the hardest, most unyielding material known to their world. The sharp metallic tang of the hot iron and the acidic wash gradually fades, replaced by an aroma that is profoundly sweet, intensely green, and deeply soothing. Stepping out of the intense heat of the dark forge, we find ourselves walking slowly through a vast, sun-drenched, gently swaying summer meadow. Scattered abundantly across the vibrant green grass are thousands of tall, slender stalks, topped with intricate, flat, umbrella-like clusters of tiny, brilliant white flowers. This is wild yarrow, a hardy, beautiful plant that possessed an almost legendary reputation for quiet, natural healing. During the long, hazy and peaceful twilight of the brief summer, foragers would patiently walk the fields, snapping the fibrous stems and gathering thick, fragrant bundles of the white flowers. They would tie them with natural linen twine and hang them completely upside down from the dark, smoke-cured timber rafters of the longhouse. As the yarrow slowly dried in the warm, ambient air of the hall, it released a highly concentrated, deeply grounding, sweetly herbaceous, and slightly peppery scent that completely neutralized the heavy smoke of the central fire. Yarrow was a highly prized vital medicine, used to create soothing, warm poultices that remarkably stopped bleeding and calmed inflamed skin. To sleep in a room heavily draped with drying yarrow was to breathe in the literal physical embodiment of the earth's quiet, healing power, a constant, fragrant reminder that the wild landscape was actively looking out for their survival. Breathe in that imagined, sweet herbal air right now. Let the clean, natural and slightly peppery scent entirely wash over your tired thoughts, clearing away the lingering dust of the day. You do not need to try to actively remember any of these ancient details or focus on the mechanics of the history. Simply let the images drift effortlessly through your mind, just like the scent of dried summer flowers riding on a slow, warm breeze. The body continues to grow beautifully heavy. The mind becomes deeply, comfortably empty, leaving only the sensation of complete, unconditional peace. The absolute fragrant silence of those hanging, drying herbs is suddenly, wonderfully broken by a completely unexpected, deeply intimate sound vibrating gently through the quiet room. Resting near the embers of the fire, a musician holds a tiny, uniquely shaped iron instrument against their lips. This is the mungiga, known to us as the jaw harp. It consists of a small, forged iron frame shaped like a teardrop, with a single, highly flexible and incredibly thin metal reed running straight through the centre. When the player plucks the tip of the metal reed, the instrument itself produces almost no audible volume. It has no wooden body or hollow chamber to amplify the sound. Instead, the musician gently rests the iron frame directly against their slightly parted teeth, brilliantly using the empty, resonating cavity of their own mouth and the dense bone of their skull as the acoustic amplifier. The result is a deep, hypnotic, rhythmic, and incredibly resonant thrumming drone. The player alters the shape of their throat and breath to create swirling, overtone melodies that seem to dance weightlessly above the low, vibrating hum. It is a profoundly intimate, internal form of music, a song that is physically, heavily felt, vibrating through the bones of the face and down into the chest, long before it is ever heard by the ears of the surrounding room. The steady, pulsing frequency is immensely relaxing, acting as a sonic massage that slowly unwinds the tight, invisible threads of anxiety. From the vibrating, organic and abstract shapes of the jaw harp's music, the attention slowly shifts to an object of absolute, rigid and perfect mathematical precision, resting quietly on a nearby table. In a wild, deeply untamed landscape defined by jagged, unpredictable fjords, sudden, violent storms and vast, uncharted wilderness, the people sought profound comfort in the creation of absolute, undeniable order. Resting on a tiny, incredibly delicate wooden balance scale are a series of flawlessly cast heavy bronze geometric shapes. These are trade weights, used specifically to meticulously measure tiny chopped fragments of silver currency. The most beautiful and complex of these weights were cast as perfect koboctahedrons, stunning 14-sided polyhedrons featuring 8 perfect triangles and 6 perfect squares. To roll one of these smooth, heavy and mathematically flawless objects between your fingertips is to feel a deeply calming, grounding sense of exactness. Every single angle is purposeful, every flat plane is intentional. In a world where the weather and the sea could change with terrifying speed, these tiny, heavy bronze shapes represented a breathtaking commitment to fairness, standardized truth, and universal, unchanging balance. They are heavy, cool anchors of logic in a swirling world, providing a deep, resonant satisfaction in knowing that some things can be perfectly, undeniably measured and understood. Looking up from the tiny 14-sided bronze weight, the mind expands outward, rocketing upward from the intimate firelit table to take in the ultimate sweeping expression of unimaginable scale. Stepping outside into the freezing, crystal-clear midnight air, you tilt your head back to observe the vast, absolute blackness of the night sky, completely untouched by the artificial glow of the modern world. Stretching majestically from one horizon to the other is a massive, glowing and densely packed band of glittering stars. The people of the ancient north did not look up at this celestial wonder and see a river of spilled milk. They looked deep into the cosmos and named it Vetrabrot, which translates beautifully and hauntingly to the Winter Street. They envisioned this brilliant sweeping arc as a vast celestial pathway, paved entirely with crushed, glittering snow and cosmic ice. In their deep, observant mythology, this was the great glowing highway that the massive flocks of migratory birds followed as they vanished from the freezing earth, flying endlessly along the starlit road to find the warmer, unseen realms of the south. To stand beneath the Winter Street is to feel simultaneously incredibly small and profoundly connected to a massive, perfectly ordered universe. The glittering path overhead offers a silent, luminous guidance, an eternal roadmap assuring the traveller that even in the absolute darkest depths of the year, there is always a clear, glowing path leading gently toward the eventual return of the light. The cold, distant and glittering starlight from the Winter Street falls softly back down to the earth, gently illuminating a plant resting in the marshlands that looks exactly as if a piece of that crushed celestial snow has fallen directly to the ground. This is the Arctic cotton grass, known as Eriophorum. In the fading late weeks of summer, the dark, damp and otherwise barren bogs suddenly erupt with thousands upon thousands of these spectacular plants. They produce brilliant, snow-white, impossibly soft and entirely weightless fluffy heads that bob and dance wildly on thin green stems in the freezing wind. Women would carefully and patiently walk the damp, yielding earth of the bogs, gently pulling and gathering thousands of these weightless silky tufts into large woven baskets. Because the Arctic cotton grass is significantly softer and vastly more insulating than traditional wool, they used it to meticulously stuff their heavy, woven linen bolsters and their most highly prized sleeping pillows. To finally lay your weary head upon a thick linen pillow, completely filled with thousands of these silky white tufts, was to literally physically sleep upon a gathered earthbound cloud. As the heavy head finally sinks deeply into that soft, incredibly white and yielding cloud, the breath perfectly matches the slow, eternal and majestic rotation of the Winter Street high above. The mind effortlessly detaches from the heavy waking world, drifting slowly and peacefully along that glowing starlit path, floating weightlessly and silently toward the quiet, unseen edge of the approaching dawn. As that distant, unseen dawn finally begins to warm the frozen sleeping earth, a miraculous, invisible change occurs deep within the absolute silence of the ancient birch forests. When the very first, subtle thaw of spring touches the snow-covered valleys, long before the green leaves even begin to think about budding, the silver birch trees quietly and powerfully awaken. They begin to pull immense amounts of pure, crystal-clear water up from the deep soil, filtering it perfectly through layers of living wood. The people of the north knew exactly how to listen to this silent internal rising. With absolute reverent care, they would drill a tiny shallow hole into the pale papery bark and insert a small hollowed twig. Drop by slow, measured drop, the tree would freely offer its vital, sweet sap into a waiting wooden bucket. This clear, slightly sweet birch water was the very first deeply refreshing taste of the new year, a crisp, cold drink of pure, unfiltered life. To drink it was to physically absorb the silent, resilient energy of the forest itself, a profound communion with a world that was patiently, beautifully coming back to life. You can almost taste that cool, clean sweetness on the crisp morning air, a gentle, hydrating reminder that even after the longest, darkest dormancy, the vitality of life always, inevitably returns. That sweet, watery freshness of the awakening trees is beautifully complemented by a sharper, deeply grounding aroma that drifted from the quiet, shaded corners of the daily storehouses. Here, the masterful woodworkers turned their undivided attention to the dense, highly aromatic wood of the wild juniper bush, while grand, sweeping ships required the towering strength of oak. The humble, everyday storage of precious butter and cheese demanded something far more intimate and protective. Juniper wood contains naturally occurring, highly fragrant oils that actively repel spoilage and purify the air. Craftsmen would meticulously carve beautiful, tightly fitted round boxes from this fragrant wood, intricately locking the curved sides together with precisely woven, flexible pine roots. When the freshly churned, rich golden butter was firmly pressed into these juniper boxes, it didn't just stay fresh. It slowly, patiently absorbed the crisp, piney, and incredibly clean essence of the wood itself. Every single meal became a quiet, sensory experience, a delicate infusion of the wild, aromatic forest resting gently on the tongue. Imagine the deeply satisfying, heavy snap of the perfectly fitted wooden lid pressing down, sealing in the freshness, creating a tiny, perfectly ordered, and beautifully scented haven of nourishment that feels incredibly safe and deeply satisfying. Your own mind is exactly like that quiet, perfectly sealed space right now. The chaotic, demanding noise of the outside world is safely locked away behind heavy doors. The breath flows in a smooth, continuous, and entirely effortless rhythm. You can simply exist in this calm, aromatic stillness, feeling the gentle, heavy weight of your body sinking deeper, trusting completely in the unconditional comfort of the night. Resting right beside that fragrant wooden box on the smooth, polished timber table is a profoundly beautiful, deeply personal tool that gently captures the soft, ambient light of the room. We frequently imagine the ancient North carved entirely from heavy, splintering wood or forged in dark, heavy iron, but they also practiced an incredibly delicate, transformative art using the discarded horns of their cattle. By slowly, patiently boiling the thick, unyielding cow horns in water for many hours, the tough keratin would miraculously soften, becoming as pliable and yielding as thick, warm leather. In this brief, magical window of softness, the artisan would firmly press the horn into a carefully carved wooden mould, shaping it into an elegant, sweeping, shallow spoon. As it slowly cooled, it hardened permanently into its new, graceful form. But the true, breathtaking beauty lay in the material itself. When held up to the flickering firelight, a polished horn spoon is not opaque. It is a stunning, translucent tapestry of swirling amber, pale gold, and deep tortoiseshell brown. It is exceptionally light, perfectly smooth to the touch, and naturally warm against the lips. To hold such a flawlessly crafted object is to realize that true elegance was not a luxury reserved for the distant wealthy empires, but a quiet, deeply tactile comfort woven directly into their everyday, ordinary meals. The smooth, translucent curve of that golden spoon is vastly magnified in a spectacular echoing instrument designed not for the intimate table, but for the immense, sweeping scale of the jagged fjords. When a community needed to communicate across vast, mist-shrouded distances, they did not rely on the sharp, frantic clanging of metal bells. Instead, they sounded the lure. This was a massive, incredibly long trumpet, often curving beautifully up and outward, meticulously crafted by splitting a long piece of wood, hollowing it out, and binding it tightly back together with endless, waterproof wrappings of pale birch bark. When a musician blew into the lure, the sound it produced was not a shrill alarm, but a profound, deep and mournful bellow that perfectly mirrored the rolling thunder of the mountains. The deep, bass-heavy acoustic waves would travel for miles, skimming smoothly over the flat, glassy surface of the dark water, echoing softly against the towering stone cliffs. It is a slow, majestic, and entirely hypnotic sound, an ambient, natural vibration that feels much more like the breath of the earth itself than a man-made note. Listen to that deep, distant, rolling echo in your imagination, feeling its low frequency gently vibrating through the floorboards, a slow, comforting pulse that instantly calms the racing heart and slows the mind. The deep, resonating echo of the wooden trumpet gradually fades into the soft, yielding silence of the forest floor, where a profoundly private, quiet act of trust is taking place under the heavy canopy of the stars. We are accustomed to loud, dramatic tales of silver and gold violently hoarded or locked away in impenetrable iron-bound chests. Yet, the people of the North often practiced a beautiful, trusting ritual with their most precious, hard-earned wealth. When a merchant or a farmer wanted to keep their beautifully twisted silver arm rings and heavy stamped coins absolutely safe, they would carefully wrap the shining metal in a piece of soft, undyed linen. Then, they would walk out into the quiet wilderness, find a distinctly shaped moss-covered boulder or the massive tangled roots of an ancient solitary oak, and gently bury the silver deep within the dark, fragrant earth. They were not simply hiding it, they were formally entrusting it to the landscape. The earth became their silent, absolute guardian, an unyielding vault of soil and stone. This practice, which has left thousands of spectacular, untouched hoards resting peacefully in the ground for over a millennium, reveals a profound, unshakable faith in the permanence of the natural world. Imagine the deep, calming satisfaction of placing something incredibly valuable into the soft, silent, and entirely protective embrace of the earth, knowing it will be held perfectly safe, completely undisturbed by the rushing, chaotic passage of time. That soft, protective earth offers many hidden, fascinating textures, but perhaps none as surprising or as incredibly well-travelled as a small, porous stone resting quietly near the hearthfire. This is a piece of pure grey pumice. It seems entirely out of place in the dense green pine forests of Scandinavia, and that is because it was actually born in the violent, spectacular volcanic eruptions of distant, freezing Iceland. Carried across the treacherous grey ocean in the deep bellies of sweeping wooden longships, these lightweight, incredibly abrasive stones were a highly prized everyday tool. Because pumice is essentially whipped, instantly frozen volcanic glass, it is completely filled with thousands of microscopic empty air bubbles, making it miraculously light enough to actually float upon the water. The people use these travelling stones to gently, rhythmically smooth and exfoliate their skin during their weekly baths, and to meticulously sand the rough, uneven edges of cured parchment and leather until they were as soft as velvet. It is a beautiful, tactile paradox. The violent, explosive, fiery energy of a massive volcano, cooled by the freezing ocean, and eventually used for the most delicate, soothing, and quiet acts of personal grooming. The gentle, rhythmic, sweeping friction of the stone perfectly smooths away all the rough, uneven edges, just as your slow, even breathing is currently smoothing away all the lingering, jagged worries of the day. Notice how easily the tension simply falls away. The mind does not need to cling to any single thought or hold on to any rigid structures. It can simply glide over these ancient quiet moments like a smooth stone passing over soft leather. You are deeply relaxed, perfectly secure in your space, and beautifully untroubled by the world outside. The perfectly smoothed, velvet-like texture of the leather seamlessly invites the touch of something even warmer, heavier, and profoundly colourful, hanging quietly in the deep shadows of the grand hall. To combat the pervasive, creeping dampness of the deep winter, the stark, heavy timber walls were completely transformed into sweeping, vibrant canvases. Women wove massive, incredibly detailed woolen tapestries, utilising the rich, naturally dyed threads of madder root red, woad blue and weld yellow. These were not mere decorations. They were thick, heavy, functional shields against the icy drafts, perfectly trapping a thick layer of insulating dead air against the wood. But as the low, golden light of the central fire flickered and danced across the room, the woven figures on the cloth, mythical beasts, great ships sailing over woolen waves, and ancient intertwined forests, seemed to physically move and breathe in the shifting shadows. The walls themselves became a quiet, living storybook. To fall asleep in a room heavily draped with these textiles was to be entirely surrounded by silent, watchful guardians and timeless, woven poetry. Imagine the profound comfort of that heavy, colourful wool, absorbing the cold, buffering the harsh winds, and gently wrapping the entire sleeping space in a thick, sound-dampening embrace of warm, ancient art. Outside those thick, tapestry-lined walls, the winter landscape is permanently locked in a vast, silent, and incredibly slippery sheet of solid ice. Yet, a solitary figure moves across the frozen surface of a wide lake with total, unwavering confidence. They are not sliding or struggling in the cold. Their steps are highly rhythmic, deliberate, and perfectly grounded. Tied securely to the bottoms of their soft leather boots with strong woolen straps are small, brilliantly forged iron devices known as ice creepers. These were simple, cross-shaped brackets of thick iron with 4 small, downward-facing spikes. With every single step, the sharp iron bit firmly and satisfyingly into the hard, glassy surface of the ice, providing absolute, unshakable traction in a world completely stripped of friction. The sound of these creepers is a deeply rhythmic, highly satisfying crunch, 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 a steady, metronomic beat of human ingenuity confidently navigating the most treacherous, unyielding terrain. It is a powerful, deeply comforting metaphor. No matter how slick, frozen, or impossible the path ahead might seem, there is always a small, clever, and grounded way to find your footing and move steadily forward. You can feel that same, absolute grounding in your own body right now, anchored safely and securely to the present moment, completely immune to the slippery, racing anxieties of the outside world. That sharp, satisfying crunch of iron on ice gives way to a soft, warm, and deeply nourishing sound back in the heart of the settlement. Resting directly over the hot, pulsing orange coals of the fire is a massive, perfectly flat, circular disc of grey soapstone known as a bakel. This ancient, incredibly heavy baking griddle was an absolute masterpiece of thermal engineering. Unlike a thin metal pan that heats unevenly and aggressively burns the food, the dense soapstone absorbed the fierce heat of the fire incredibly slowly, distributing it in a perfectly even, flawless circle of radiant warmth. The baker would take thin, delicate rounds of fermented oat and barley dough, dusted lightly with pale flour, and lay them gently onto the hot stone. The dough would instantly begin to rise and bubble, filling the entire hall with the intoxicating, deeply comforting and earthy aroma of baking bread. The stone required immense patience. It could not be rushed. It demanded a slow, deliberate rhythm that matched the turning of the sun. The sheer, heavy permanence of the baking stone, passed down carefully from mother to daughter for generations, represented the unbreakable, enduring and warm centre of the family. Let the imagined, rich scent of that baking bread entirely fill your senses, a primal, deeply nourishing aroma that instantly signals absolute safety, infinite provision, and the warm, quiet comfort of home. The rich, warm and heavy scent of the baking bread slowly drifts up toward the massive, sweeping wooden rafters, eventually finding its way out into the cool, expansive and constantly moving sky. High above the harbour, resting proudly on the sweeping curved prow of a resting ship, is an object of startling, intricate beauty, designed solely to read the invisible breath of the world. This is the weather vane, flawlessly cast from gleaming golden bronze. Unlike simple cloth flags that violently whip, snap and tear in the heavy storm, these heavy metal vanes were intricately pierced with swirling openwork patterns of mythical beasts and winding endless vines. They were perfectly, masterfully balanced on a single frictionless iron pin. When the wind blew, even the absolute faintest, most imperceptible breeze, the heavy bronze would silently, effortlessly rotate to point the exact way. As the golden metal caught the low light of the rising sun, it flashed brilliantly against the dark grey rolling clouds. It is a stunning, elegant reminder that we do not always need to fight the immense, unseen forces of the world. Sometimes, we only need to build a quiet, perfectly balanced centre, allowing the invisible currents of life to smoothly and gently guide us. The gleaming, rotating bronze captures the wandering light, turning slowly, smoothly, and endlessly in the quiet air, a perfect silent compass pointing the way toward an ever-deepening, profound, and completely restorative sleep. That perfectly balanced, silent compass pointing the way through the shifting winds above the harbour leads our thoughts back to the magnificent, sweeping vessels themselves, where the invisible, raging power of the sky was miraculously caught and completely tamed. To capture the immense pushing force of a North Atlantic storm, the massive, square woolen sails of the longships had to be secured by a rigging system of unimaginable, unbreakable strength. They did not rely on simple, woven plant fibres that could easily fray and snap under the terrifying tension of a gale. Instead, they utilised an absolute marvel of organic engineering, ropes made entirely from the hide of the massive Arctic walrus. The harvesters engaged in an act of staggering patience and geometric brilliance. They would take a single, thick, deeply oiled walrus hide and meticulously cut it in one continuous, unbroken and endlessly spiralling strip. From a single animal, they could produce an incredibly dense, immensely strong, and naturally waterproof leather rope hundreds of feet long, completely devoid of any weak splices or vulnerable joining knots. To watch the heavy oiled leather absorb the violent, chaotic shock of a sudden wind gust, effortlessly transferring that terrifying energy into smooth forward momentum, is a breathtaking lesson in resilience. The violent storm is not defeated by rigid, unyielding force, but by the supple, perfectly prepared strength of the natural world, gently holding the vast ship in a web of absolute security. When those long, salt-stained and deeply demanding voyages across the freezing oceans finally concluded, the weary sailors returned to the quiet shores, seeking the absolute grounding warmth of the heavy timber halls. In the deepest, most isolated and unforgiving stretches of the long northern winter, the very architecture of the farm provided a beautiful, deeply comforting and highly unusual form of interspecies survival. Many longhouses were designed specifically as a birdwelling, meaning the human family lived comfortably under the exact same sweeping turf-covered roof as their massive, heavy-coated livestock. Separated only by a thin, woven wattle and daub wall, the immense, radiant body heat of a dozen resting cattle slowly and continuously filtered directly into the human living space. The ambient temperature of the room was organically, beautifully sustained by the sheer, physical presence of life. In the absolute freezing darkness of a winter night, the deep, rhythmic and incredibly slow breathing of the sleeping herd, accompanied by their gentle, resonant lowing, provided a deep, bass-heavy and profoundly comforting lullaby. It is a stunning, deeply grounding realization of shared existence, the understanding that survival in the harshest environments was not a solitary human endeavour, but a collective, warm, and peacefully breathing ecosystem carefully sheltered beneath a single roof. Your own breathing can easily synchronize with that ancient, slow and heavy rhythm now. The air moves deeply into the lungs, filling the chest with a warming, heavy calm, and exhales in a long, unbroken release. The heavy muscles of your legs and shoulders sink deeply into the soft support beneath you, absorbing the imagined ambient warmth of that secure, firelit sanctuary. Hanging quietly in the warm, dry air near the central hearth, gently absorbing that ambient heat, are garments of such startling, unexpected vibrancy that they seem to defy the stark, grey landscape resting just outside the wooden doors. We often mistakenly assume that brilliant, deeply saturated purples were an exclusive, impossibly expensive luxury reserved strictly for distant southern emperors and foreign royalty. Yet the brilliantly observant people of the ancient north unlocked their own, highly guarded secret alchemy. They gathered a humble, highly unassuming and crusty grey lichen known as Ochrolechia tartarea, which grew with agonizing, microscopic slowness on the ancient, wind-blasted granite boulders of the coastline. By carefully, patiently scraping this dry, dusty crust from the unyielding stone and slowly fermenting it in warm liquids over many quiet weeks, they miraculously coaxed out a stunningly brilliant, incredibly vivid, and deeply royal purple dye. It is a slow, magnificent, and quiet miracle, drawing the richest, softest, and most luxurious colour imaginable directly from the hardest, driest, and most unforgiving stones of the earth. It gently reveals that breathtaking beauty and profound vibrancy are often hidden securely within the most plain, overlooked, and rugged surfaces, just waiting for the right amount of time and patient attention to beautifully bloom. That intensely patient, slow extraction of hidden, colourful magic perfectly mirrors the profound, deeply respected spiritual practices that took place within the flickering, shifting shadows of the hall. When a community needed quiet guidance or sought to look beyond the heavy, opaque veil of the waking world, they called upon a deeply respected woman known as a Völva, a masterful seeress of the ancient north. To journey securely into the vast, unseen realms, she held an extraordinary heavy object, a long, perfectly forged iron staff, often topped with a complex, intricately woven, basket-like geometric cage. To enter the deep, hypnotic and heavily protected trance state known as Seda, she would not speak frantically or move wildly. Instead, she would rhythmically, steadily, and powerfully strike the heavy base of this iron staff directly against the hard-packed earth of the floor. Thud, thud, thud. It was a steady, metronomic, and deeply echoing heartbeat that slowly, inevitably drowned out the chaotic, swirling noise of the everyday waking mind, opening her consciousness entirely to the vast, sweeping, and silent currents of the cosmos. That heavy, rhythmic, and grounding vibration calls the wandering mind to a place of absolute, undisturbed focus, a singular, heavy anchor point in the shifting tides of thought. The absolute flawless mental balance required by the seeress to safely navigate those unseen realms finds a spectacular physical embodiment out in the bright, sunlit, and grassy meadows of the brief summer. Here, the people joyfully practiced Gleamer, the ancient, highly structured, and deeply traditional martial art of the North. Yet, this was not a violent, aggressive, or striking brawl meant to injure. It was a deeply respectful, almost poetic, and highly disciplined dance of absolute physical balance and invisible leverage. Two participants would step softly onto the lush green grass, securely grip each other by their thick leather belts, and begin to step in continuous, smooth, and highly controlled circles. The entire practice relied completely on intense, quiet listening. Listening specifically to the physical gravity, the subtle momentum, and the shifting weight of another human being. To watch a match of Gleamer is to witness a fluid, mesmerizing and unbroken waltz. It is a profound physical reminder that true enduring strength is rarely about exerting blunt, rigid force, but rather about maintaining perfect, yielding balance, understanding exactly when to step back, and moving in effortless circular harmony with the massive forces that surround you. The intense, joyous physical exertion of the wrestling match on the sweet-smelling summer grass naturally concludes with a grand, communal evening meal, heavily seasoned with a miraculous, essential mineral that was completely transformed by human patience. Along the misty, sandy and windswept coastlines, the vast, intimidating sea itself was carefully, quietly harvested. The people built low, slow-burning and heavily smouldering wood fires directly beneath large, shallow and brilliantly crafted pans made of thick lead or heavily baked, dense clay. They would carefully fill these wide pans with buckets of cold, grey, chaotic seawater. Over many long, quiet hours of slow, deliberate and entirely unhurried boiling, the liquid ocean slowly, gracefully evaporated into the cool, invisible air, leaving entirely behind pure, brilliant white and flawlessly geometric crystals of sea salt. This slow, elemental alchemy transformed the wild, untamable and overwhelming ocean into tiny, perfect and deeply stabilizing cubes of pure, essential flavor. The smell of the evaporating brine is incredibly crisp, sharp and purifying, gently washing the tired mind with a profound sense of pure, crystalline clarity. The massive, uncontrollable ocean is distilled down into a tiny, perfect, and beautifully ordered crystal resting safely in the palm of the hand. The brilliant, pristine white of those perfect sea salt crystals perfectly matches the stunning, pale perfection of an object resting quietly on a high, heavily carved wooden shelf in the grandest estates. Found frequently in the quiet, undisturbed graves of highly respected and powerful women, these are large, flat and meticulously carved plaques made entirely of solid whalebone, often elegantly topped with the stylized, sweeping and beautifully symmetrical heads of two majestic horses quietly facing one another. These smooth, heavy boards were incredibly elite surfaces used for meticulously smoothing fine, pale linen or carefully crafting highly delicate textiles. The sheer, terrifying scale of the bone, a massive material respectfully harvested from the absolute unbothered giants of the deep, black ocean, was brought intimately into the quiet, warm domestic space. It was completely tamed, patiently carved, and endlessly polished, until the surface felt exactly like the smoothest, warmest marble. The massive, terrifying and incomprehensible scale of the deep-sea leviathan is gently, beautifully transformed into a highly refined, perfectly quiet tool of daily peaceful creation, proving that even the most massive forces in the world can be softly shaped into something that brings gentle domestic order. As you imagine the completely smooth, unblemished and cool surface of that heavy polished bone, you can gently allow your own mind to become exactly as smooth and undisturbed. Any rough lingering edges of your day, any jagged unfinished thoughts or sharp anxieties are simply smoothed away, leaving a vast, pale and perfectly clean expanse of quiet awareness. There is absolutely nothing you need to figure out, and nothing you need to actively hold on to. The quiet, highly focused act of crafting and smoothing leads effortlessly to a much more intimate, secret and profoundly touching form of creation. In the bustling, heavily timber-lined streets of the ancient, sprawling trading hub of Briggan, modern archaeologists unearthed a profound, startling testament to everyday, highly recognizable human connection. People would regularly take small, flat, completely discarded scraps of soft pine wood, or even the smooth, flat back of an everyday bone hair comb, and quickly, quietly, carve deeply personal, highly intimate runic messages before slipping them silently to a loved one. Among the heavy, formal tallies of trade, the cold legal documents, and the grand sweeping sagas of kings, they found tiny, fragile whispers of overwhelming affection. "My darling, kiss me," or simply, "I love you with all my heart." These are not grand, epic poems meant to echo loudly through the halls of eternity. They are the fragile, temporary, and deeply recognizable quiet moments of pure love, scratched hastily into everyday wood by people who lived, breathed, and felt exactly as we do today. The vast, intimidating, and heavy scale of human history shrinks beautifully and instantly down to the intimate, quiet, and familiar pulse of a single, beating heart, reaching gently across 1,000 years to remind us that love has always been the quietest, most enduring anchor. The straight, simple, and deeply human letters of the runic alphabet echo the mesmerizing, intensely complex, and endless geometry of their most famous protective art. Carved deeply and permanently into the heavy, weight-bearing wooden door frames of their homes, and the sweeping, curved prows of their ocean-going ships were spectacular, labyrinthine knots of twisting beasts and unbroken, gracefully sweeping vines. These intricate, deeply shadowed carvings were not merely decorative flourishes meant to impress. They were highly intentional, highly functional, and brilliantly designed traps for the mind. They held a profound belief that any wandering, restless, or malicious spirit approaching the warm, lit threshold of the home would become hopelessly, inevitably, and completely mesmerized by the endless, overlapping, and beautifully confusing pathways of the wooden knot. The spirit's eye would be forcibly drawn in, forced to tirelessly follow the twisting, undulating line forever, entirely unable to find a beginning or an end, thereby safely trapping its chaotic energy and keeping the interior of the home perfectly, absolutely safe. You can use these very same ancient, beautifully carved knots right now in your own imagination. Let any wandering, anxious, or restless thoughts become instantly trapped in that endless, beautiful, and sweeping wooden maze, tiring themselves out as they endlessly loop, until they simply, quietly, fade deep into the heavy woodwork, leaving your inner sanctuary completely untouched, profoundly quiet, and perfectly secure. With the heavy wooden threshold entirely secured and the mind perfectly, unconditionally protected, the final, most harmonious, and deeply satisfying sound of the evening begins to slowly fill the room. A musician sits quietly by the glowing, heavily banked orange coals of the central fire, holding the gracefully curved, hollow wooden body of a lyre. But before the soothing song can finally begin, a quiet, absolutely essential ritual of alignment must take place. The musician reaches up with a slow, practiced hand to the small, beautifully carved bone pegs at the very top of the instrument. With their ear pressed incredibly closely to the vibrating ancient wood, they gently pluck a single, out-of-tune string, producing a slightly discordant, wavering, and unsettled note. Slowly, with microscopic, intensely patient, and highly deliberate adjustments of the thumb and forefinger, they gently turn the bone peg, incrementally and carefully tightening the heavy, twisted gut string. The wavering, unsettled note slowly, steadily rises. The chaotic, clashing vibration begins to smooth out entirely until suddenly it hits the exact, perfect, and flawlessly resonant pitch. The entire wooden body of the lyre hums with a warm, unified, and deeply flawless harmony. The lingering tension is perfectly, beautifully resolved. That profound, deeply satisfying moment of finding the exact, perfect pitch is the ultimate sound of absolute peace. A beautiful, resonant, and deeply ordered vibration that gently, effortlessly guides your own physical body into a state of absolute, flawless, and deeply restorative alignment, completely restorative sleep. That perfectly balanced, silent compass, pointing the way through the shifting winds above the harbour, leads our thoughts back to the magnificent, sweeping vessels themselves, where the invisible, raging power of the sky was miraculously caught and completely tamed. To capture the immense pushing force of a North Atlantic storm, the massive square woolen sails of the longships had to be secured by a rigging system of unimaginable, unbreakable strength. They did not rely on simple woven plant fibres that could easily fray and snap under the terrifying tension of a gale. Instead, they utilised an absolute marvel of organic engineering, ropes made entirely from the hide of the massive Arctic walrus. The harvesters engaged in an act of staggering patience and geometric brilliance. They would take a single, thick, deeply oiled walrus hide and meticulously cut it in one continuous, unbroken and endlessly spiralling strip. From a single animal, they could produce an incredibly dense, immensely strong, and naturally waterproof leather rope hundreds of feet long, completely devoid of any weak splices or vulnerable joining knots. To watch the heavy, oiled leather absorb the violent, chaotic shock of a sudden wind gust, effortlessly transferring that terrifying energy into smooth, forward momentum, is a breathtaking lesson in resilience. The violent storm is not defeated by rigid, unyielding force, but by the supple, perfectly prepared strength of the natural world, gently holding the vast ship in a web of absolute security. When those long, salt-stained and deeply demanding voyages across the freezing oceans finally concluded, the weary sailors returned to the quiet shores, seeking the absolute grounding warmth of the heavy timber hauls. In the deepest, most isolated and unforgiving stretches of the long northern winter, the very architecture of the farm provided a beautiful, deeply comforting, and highly unusual form of interspecies survival. Many longhouses were designed specifically as a buyer dwelling, meaning the human family lived comfortably under the exact same sweeping turf-covered roof as their massive heavy-coated livestock. Separated only by a thin woven wattle and daub wall, the immense radiant body heat of a dozen resting cattle slowly and continuously filtered directly into the human living space. The ambient temperature of the room was organically beautifully sustained by the sheer, physical presence of life. In the absolute freezing darkness of a winter night, the deep, rhythmic and incredibly slow breathing of the sleeping herd, accompanied by their gentle, resonant lowing, provided a deep, bass-heavy and profoundly comforting lullaby. It is a stunning, deeply grounding realization of shared existence, the understanding that survival in the harshest environments was not a solitary human endeavour, but a collective, warm, and peacefully breathing ecosystem carefully sheltered beneath a single roof. Your own breathing can easily synchronize with that ancient, slow and heavy rhythm now. The air moves deeply into the lungs, filling the chest with a warming, heavy calm, and exhales in a long, unbroken release. The heavy muscles of your legs and shoulders sink deeply into the soft support beneath you, absorbing the imagined ambient warmth of that secure, firelit sanctuary. Hanging quietly in the warm, dry air near the central hearth, gently absorbing that ambient heat, are garments of such startling, unexpected vibrancy that they seem to defy the stark, grey landscape resting just outside the wooden doors. We often mistakenly assume that brilliant, deeply saturated purples were an exclusive, impossibly expensive luxury reserved strictly for distant southern emperors and foreign royalty. Yet, the brilliantly observant people of the ancient North unlocked their own, highly guarded secret alchemy. They gathered a humble, highly unassuming and crusty grey lichen known as Ochrolechia tartarea, which grew with agonizing microscopic slowness on the ancient wind-blasted granite boulders of the coastline. By carefully, patiently scraping this dry, dusty crust from the unyielding stone and slowly fermenting it in warm liquids over many quiet weeks, they miraculously coaxed out a stunningly brilliant, incredibly vivid and deeply royal purple dye. It is a slow, magnificent and quiet miracle, drawing the richest, softest and most luxurious colour imaginable directly from the hardest, driest and most unforgiving stones of the earth. It gently reveals that breathtaking beauty and profound vibrancy are often hidden securely within the most plain, overlooked and rugged surfaces, just waiting for the right amount of time and patient attention to beautifully bloom. That intensely patient, slow extraction of hidden, colourful magic perfectly mirrors the profound, deeply respected spiritual practices that took place within the flickering, shifting shadows of the hall. When a community needed quiet guidance or sought to look beyond the heavy, opaque veil of the waking world, they called upon a deeply respected woman known as a Völva, a masterful seeress of the ancient north. To journey securely into the vast unseen realms, she held an extraordinary heavy object, a long, perfectly forged iron staff, often topped with a complex, intricately woven, basket-like geometric cage. To enter the deep, hypnotic and heavily protected trance state known as Seda, she would not speak frantically or move wildly. Instead, she would rhythmically, steadily and powerfully strike the heavy base of this iron staff directly against the hard-packed earth of the floor. Thud, thud, thud. It was a steady, metronomic and deeply echoing heartbeat that slowly, inevitably drowned out the chaotic, swirling noise of the everyday waking mind, opening her consciousness entirely to the vast, sweeping and silent currents of the cosmos. That heavy, rhythmic and grounding vibration calls the wandering mind to a place of absolute, undisturbed focus, a singular, heavy anchor point in the shifting tides of thought. The absolute, flawless mental balance required by the seeress to safely navigate those unseen realms finds a spectacular physical embodiment out in the bright, sunlit and grassy meadows of the brief summer. Here, the people joyfully practice Glima, the ancient, highly structured and deeply traditional martial art of the north. Yet this was not a violent, aggressive or striking brawl meant to injure. It was a deeply respectful, almost poetic and highly disciplined dance of absolute physical balance and invisible leverage. Two participants would step softly onto the lush green grass, securely grip each other by their thick leather belts, and begin to step in continuous, smooth and highly controlled circles. The entire practice relied completely on intense, quiet listening specifically to the physical gravity, the subtle momentum, and the shifting weight of another human being. To watch a match of Glima is to witness a fluid, mesmerizing, and unbroken waltz. It is a profound physical reminder that true, enduring strength is rarely about exerting blunt, rigid force, but rather about maintaining perfect, yielding balance, understanding exactly when to step back, and moving in effortless circular harmony with the massive forces that surround you. The intense, joyous physical exertion of the wrestling match on the sweet-smelling summer grass naturally concludes with a grand communal evening meal, heavily seasoned with a miraculous essential mineral that was completely transformed by human patience. Along the misty, sandy and windswept coastlines, the vast, intimidating sea itself was carefully, quietly harvested. The people built low, slow-burning and heavily smouldering wood fires directly beneath large, shallow and brilliantly crafted pans made of thick lead or heavily baked, dense clay. They would carefully fill these wide pans with buckets of cold, grey, chaotic seawater. Over many long, quiet hours of slow, deliberate and entirely unhurried boiling, the liquid ocean slowly, gracefully evaporated into the cool, invisible air, leaving entirely behind pure, brilliant white and flawlessly geometric crystals of sea salt. This slow, elemental alchemy transformed the wild, untamable and overwhelming ocean into tiny, perfect and deeply stabilizing cubes of pure, essential flavor. The smell of the evaporating brine is incredibly crisp, sharp and purifying, gently washing the tired mind with a profound sense of pure, crystalline clarity. The massive, uncontrollable ocean is distilled down into a tiny, perfect and beautifully ordered crystal resting safely in the palm of the hand. The brilliant, pristine white of those perfect sea salt crystals perfectly matches the stunning, pale perfection of an object resting quietly on a high, heavily carved wooden shelf in the grandest estates. Found frequently in the quiet, undisturbed graves of highly respected and powerful women, these are large, flat, and meticulously carved plaques made entirely of solid whalebone, often elegantly topped with the stylized, sweeping, and beautifully symmetrical heads of two majestic horses quietly facing one another. These smooth, heavy boards were incredibly elite surfaces used for meticulously smoothing fine, pale linen or carefully crafting highly delicate textiles. The sheer, terrifying scale of the bone, a massive material respectfully harvested from the absolute unbothered giants of the deep black ocean, was brought intimately into the quiet, warm domestic space. It was completely tamed, patiently carved, and endlessly polished, until the surface felt exactly like the smoothest, warmest marble. The massive, terrifying, and incomprehensible scale of the deep-sea leviathan is gently, beautifully transformed into a highly refined, perfectly quiet tool of daily peaceful creation, proving that even the most massive forces in the world can be softly shaped into something that brings gentle, domestic order. As you imagine the completely smooth, unblemished, and cool surface of that heavy, polished bone, you can gently allow your own mind to become exactly as smooth and undisturbed. Any rough, lingering edges of your day, any jagged, unfinished thoughts or sharp anxieties are simply smoothed away, leaving a vast, pale, and perfectly clean expanse of quiet awareness. There is absolutely nothing you need to figure out, and nothing you need to actively hold on to. The quiet, highly focused act of crafting and smoothing leads effortlessly to a much more intimate, secret, and profoundly touching form of creation. In the bustling, heavily timber-lined streets of the ancient, sprawling trading hub of Briggan, modern archaeologists unearthed a profound, startling testament to everyday, highly recognizable human connection. People would regularly take small, flat, completely discarded scraps of soft pine wood, or even the smooth, flat back of an everyday bone hair comb, and quickly, quietly, carve deeply personal, highly intimate runic messages before slipping them silently to a loved one. Among the heavy, formal tallies of trade, the cold legal documents, and the grand, sweeping sagas of kings, they found tiny, fragile whispers of overwhelming affection. "My darling, kiss me," or simply, "I love you with all my heart." These are not grand, epic poems meant to echo loudly through the halls of eternity. They are the fragile, temporary, and deeply recognizable quiet moments of pure love, scratched hastily into everyday wood by people who lived, breathed, and felt exactly as we do today. The vast, intimidating, and heavy scale of human history shrinks beautifully and instantly down to the intimate, quiet, and familiar pulse of a single, beating heart, reaching gently across 1,000 years to remind us that love has always been the quietest, most enduring anchor. The straight, simple, and deeply human letters of the runic alphabet echo the mesmerizing, intensely complex, and endless geometry of their most famous protective art. Carved deeply and permanently into the heavy, weight-bearing wooden doorframes of their homes and the sweeping, curved prows of their ocean-going ships were spectacular, labyrinthine knots of twisting beasts and unbroken, gracefully sweeping vines. These intricate, deeply shadowed carvings were not merely decorative flourishes meant to impress. They were highly intentional, highly functional, and brilliantly designed traps for the mind. They held a profound belief that any wandering, restless, or malicious spirit approaching the warm, lit threshold of the home would become hopelessly, inevitably, and completely mesmerized by the endless, overlapping, and beautifully confusing pathways of the wooden knot. The spirit's eye would be forcibly drawn in, forced to tirelessly follow the twisting, undulating line forever, entirely unable to find a beginning or an end, thereby safely trapping its chaotic energy and keeping the interior of the home perfectly, absolutely safe. You can use these very same ancient, beautifully carved knots right now in your own imagination. Let any wandering, anxious or restless thoughts become instantly trapped in that endless, beautiful and sweeping wooden maze, tiring themselves out as they endlessly loop, until they simply, quietly fade deep into the heavy woodwork, leaving your inner sanctuary completely untouched, profoundly quiet and perfectly secure. With the heavy wooden threshold entirely secured and the mind perfectly unconditionally protected, the final, most harmonious and deeply satisfying sound of the evening begins to slowly fill the room. A musician sits quietly by the glowing, heavily banked orange coals of the central fire, holding the gracefully curved hollow wooden body of a lyre. But before the soothing song can finally begin, a quiet, absolutely essential ritual of alignment must take place. The musician reaches up with a slow, practiced hand to the small, beautifully carved bone pegs at the very top of the instrument. With their ear pressed incredibly closely to the vibrating ancient wood, they gently pluck a single, out-of-tune string, producing a slightly discordant, wavering and unsettled note. Slowly, with microscopic, intensely patient and highly deliberate adjustments of the thumb and forefinger, they gently turn the bone peg, incrementally and carefully tightening the heavy, twisted gut string. The wavering, unsettled note slowly, steadily rises. The chaotic, clashing vibration begins to smooth out entirely until suddenly it hits the exact, perfect and flawlessly resonant pitch. The entire wooden body of the lyre hums with a warm, unified and deeply flawless harmony. The lingering tension is perfectly, beautifully resolved. That profound, deeply satisfying moment of finding the exact perfect pitch is the ultimate sound of absolute peace, a beautiful, resonant and deeply ordered vibration that gently, effortlessly guides your own physical body into a state of absolute, flawless and deeply restorative alignment. That profound, deeply resonant harmony found in the vibrating wood of the lyre expands one final time, carrying your awareness beyond the walls of the hall, beyond the rocky fjords, and even beyond the glittering winter street. Our final secret lies in the very substance that defined this entire world, the ancient, resilient, and life-giving wood of the great northern forests. For the people of the north, the tree was not merely a resource, it was a silent, eternal witness. They believed that when the very first human beings were created, they were not sculpted from cold clay or fallen stone, but were awakened from two pieces of driftwood found washed upon the shore, one of ash and one of elm. This reveals the most beautiful and expansive truth of their entire existence, the profound belief that we are, in our very essence, made of the same living material as the world around us. We are the wood that flexes against the storm. We are the roots that hold firm in the dark. We are the sap that rises with the promise of spring. To understand this is to realize that you are never truly separate from the peace of the natural world. As you lie here in the stillness, you are as ancient as the oak and as resilient as the birch. The cycle of the day and night, the turning of the seasons and the steady rhythm of the stars are all reflected in the quiet, steady beating of your own heart. This final wonder is the realization that you have always belonged to this deep, enduring stillness. You are home. The journey is now complete. The 101 wonders we have gathered, the glowing sunstones, the soft eiderdown, the rhythmic clack of the loom, and the silent aurora, have all been safely gathered into the quiet corners of your mind. You do not need to hold on to any of them. You do not need to remember the names, the places, or the ancient words. Like a handful of dry white sea salt dissolving into the dark, warm water, let these images simply soften and fade. They have done their work. They have built a sanctuary of warmth and safety around you, and now they are gently yielding, making room for the absolute weightless dark. Feel the profound heaviness of your body as it sinks deeper and deeper into the support beneath you. Every muscle has finally surrendered its hold. The shoulders are soft, the jaw is loose, the forehead is smooth and cool. There is no more searching to do. There are no more horizons to cross. The longship has been pulled into the stone-walled boathouse, the heavy woolen tents are drawn tight, and the central fire is banked safely beneath its blanket of grey ash. The world is very, very quiet. Listen to the absolute silence between your breaths. It is a vast, kind and protective silence that reaches back through 1,000 years of winter nights. In this space, there is nothing but peace. There is nothing but rest. The journey has ended, and the harbour is perfectly still. You're drifting now, floating on a calm, dark sea that carries you toward a dreamless and restorative sleep. The stars of the winter street continue their slow, majestic rotation above, but you are tucked away, warm and secure, deep in the heart of the ancient north. And now, 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.